Do you swear or affirm under penalty of perjury that the testimony you're about to give today will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth? And I'm sorry, ma'am, can you answer by the mic?
Yes.
All right, thank you, ma'am. Ms. Devereaux, you may resume.
Thank you.
Good morning, ma'am.
Good morning.
So I want to start this morning where we left off yesterday with all the technology issues. Have you had an opportunity to listen to that jail phone call with Javi that we were talking about yesterday?
Yeah.
Okay. And so again, just to kind of recap where we were yesterday, when you were first arrested, you thought you were going to be able to bond out of jail. Right?
Yes.
And so your plan was to tell your children that you were just on vacation.
Yes.
And again, you weren't planning, obviously, to be arrested on that November 11th date, right?
Yes.
So you were just abruptly taken from your children's life.
Yes.
And Javi was telling you that he didn't think it was going to work telling your children that you were on vacation.
Yes.
Specifically because what if you never got out?
Yeah.
And you told Javi not to tell your kids anything else because you didn't want them to know that you were in jail.
Yes.
And you didn't want your kids to worry, right?
Yes.
And Javi said, quote, "They're going to ask about you. What do you want me to do if you fuck yourself?"
Yes.
And your kids were asking where you were, right?
Yes.
And I have previously let you listen to what's been marked as Defendant's Exhibit S as in Sam, and your initials and date are on it, correct?
Yes. Yeah.
U is in Unicorn,
Yes.
and again, your initials and date.
Yes.
And T is in Tom,
Yes.
and again, your initials and date,
Yes.
right? And can you tell the jury who's talking on these videos?
Me, my kids, and my hubby.
Okay. And these are phone calls or recorded conversations that you were having with your children while you were in the Weld County Jail,
Yes.
at the very beginning of your stay at the Weld County Jail, right?
Yes.
And they're a fair and accurate depiction of these conversations that you were having with your children, right?
Yes.
Your Honor, this time I would move to admit Defendant's Exhibit S as in Sam, U as in Unicorn, T as in Tom.
Any objection from the state?
No objection.
All right, the court will admit S, T, and U into evidence, and you may publish at your discretion.
Hello? Mommy, where are you? Why? What? Go take a look.
Just for the record, that was S.
The mommy. The mommy. Are you at home? Are you here now?
Yeah, on vacation.
Why?
Because.
Are you here? What?
Are you doing
Are
okay?
you? Yeah.
Yeah.
Mommy, are you here?
No, mommy's feels better. I love you, baby.
Just for the record, that was T, and next will be you.
Mommy, are you still at that?
What, baby?
Mommy, are you at the hospital?
Yeah, that's not vacation. I can see, I can see, baby.
We can hear, is it fair to say, your voice quiver when your children ask you where you are.
Yes.
We can hear it in your voice, the pain it must have caused you in those moments to not be able to tell your children that you were coming home.
Yes.
And anyone who knows kids know, especially at that age, when they have something in their mind, they don't let it go, right?
Yes.
They keep asking the same questions.
Yes.
So you had to have these unbearable conversations with your children almost every time you talk to them.
Yes.
And it had to have been even harder to have to lie to your own children about where you were.
Yes.
And it had to have been unbearable to not know if you were ever going to see your children again
Yes.
outside of jail.
Yes.
And ma'am, you had to have been having the highest levels of emotions going on in those early days.
Yes.
Things like guilt, right?
Yes.
Shame,
Yes.
sorrow.
Yes.
And Javi wasn't necessarily making things easier on you, was he?
No.
Javi wasn't sugarcoating for you how you being in jail and making the choices you made were impacting your children.
Yeah.
For example, during one of these initial phone calls, one of the things he describes to you is how your son even brought it up just going to get a haircut,
Yeah.
and how your son just randomly told him, Mommy's never coming back.
Yeah.
And you had to hear that. He wasn't hiding it from you. You're trying to make your days go a little bit better or easier, right?
Yeah.
And another example is there were times where you were trying to reassure Javi that things were okay. They were going to be okay, right?
Yes.
And Javi was just going to snap at you in frustration.
Yes.
On one occasion, and this was around the same time you first met your lawyers, Javi snapped at you when you just asked him if he was okay. Do you remember that?
Yeah.
He said, quote, "What do you mean, am I okay? No, I'm not fucking okay. You think I want to be okay with all of this? The kids are literally getting mad at me because..."
All right. Any response, Ms. Deborah?
Effect on the listener. It's not being offered for the truth of the matter asserted.
I'll overrule the objection. You can continue.
The kids are literally getting mad at me because you don't pick them up. Right?
Yeah.
Because you're in the Weld County jail and everything has been dumped on his plate.
Yes.
Your high school sweetheart is furious at you.
Yes.
Furious at putting him in this situation where he has to face his children every day
Yes.
because you weren't there. And after a while, you reassured Javi that you were going to tell the kids the truth, right?
Yes.
And you reassured Javi by saying, I'm not just going to leave them like that, right?
Yes.
And Javi again snapped at you, and he told you you did leave them like that, right?
Yeah.
He even actually raised his voice at you during that conversation.
Yeah.
And he said you left them in this situation, or you left them because you put yourself in this situation.
Yeah.
And ma'am, not only were you dealing with the gut-wrenching conversations with your children and Javi,
Yeah.
but you were also dealing with and grappling with how being incarcerated on these charges impacted the rest of your family.
Yes.
The people that you love the most, your sister,
Yes.
Hannah. Is that your sister's name?
Yeah.
Your sister, again, during these initial couple weeks, actually had to take time off work to go to your first court appearance, right?
Yes.
And you were really embarrassed because she had to tell her boss what was going on.
Yes.
And you were embarrassed that your sister's boss was going to think that you were a criminal.
Yeah.
Embarrassed about how that would reflect back on your sister as well.
Yeah.
And your arrest, you're very close with your sister Hannah, right?
Yes.
And sure, it's embarrassing to have to tell, a boss that you need to go to a court date, right? But she was pretty communicative with you about how it was really impacting her. For example, she told you about having a dream that you were released from jail,
Yes.
and that when you were released from jail, your father, who had passed away, was there to greet you.
Yeah.
So you being in custody on first-degree murder charges, you're hearing your sister's even dreaming about it.
Yeah.
And then there's also a conversation, another dynamic with Hannah of you two trying to figure out, how do you tell the rest of the family and what do you tell the rest of the family? Right?
Yeah.
So again, now we're talking about some more shame, right?
Yes.
And that was also a concern from your mom, right?
Yeah.
And during one of these initial jail phone calls with your mom, you guys are trying to plan, like, what do we tell the rest of the family, right?
Yes.
You had to worry about, how do I tell my grandmother I'm in custody on first-degree murder charges?
Yeah.
And then you're also worried, obviously, about how people who may know you in the community see this, right?
Yes.
Because you went to high school here in Greeley.
Yes.
Your sister told you about there being Facebook posts, news articles, right?
Yes.
And this was something that you talked about with your sister about how embarrassing this is.
Yes.
Right. And you knew that your kids' teachers would see it.
Yes.
And you're sitting in jail on first-degree murder charges, and your family is just left in the community to deal with all the aftermath.
Yes.
And that's pressure on you, isn't it?
Yes.
So again, you're experiencing all of these wild emotions, right? Like emotions that you probably can never have fathomed in your life, right?
Yes.
And you're experiencing all this as you're going to your first court date. And at that first court date is when you figure out you're not getting bond.
Yes.
There is no way of getting out of jail.
Yes.
And after you met with your lawyers for the first time, you told Javi that the male lawyer, Mr. Keith Coleman, right,
Yes.
told you that he would take him about 30 days to get police reports and review and everything.
Yes.
And Javi was, again, pretty angry at you, right?
Yeah.
He said, quote, "You're telling me you're going to be in there for 30 fucking days?" Right?
Yes.
And then those 30 days go. You had court on November 17th, 2021, right?
Yes.
Nothing happens at that court date, right?
No.
You don't get out of jail.
No.
And then the case gets continued to January 12th, 2022, right?
Yes.
Which meant another 2 months of you being in jail.
Yes.
And you tried to call Javi after that November court date, and he didn't answer you, did he?
I really don't remember. It sounds about right.
Do you remember a time where he answered and you were like, why haven't you been picking up the phone? And he said, because if he had answered, he would have, quote, went fucking off on you. Does that sound right?
Yeah.
And so leading up to that January 12th, 2022 court date, things aren't getting any better, right?
No.
You're still in jail, and then that January court date came after Christmas, right?
Yes.
And so you had just missed Christmas with your family.
Yes.
Instead of opening presents with your kids, you got colored Christmas tree drawings from them in jail.
Yes.
And so as you're approaching that March 23rd, 2022 court date, again, it's just piling on top of all of these emotions, right?
Yeah.
All of these pressures, all of these stressors, right?
Yes.
And on top of all of those sort of outside of jail pressures and stressors, there's a lot also going on inside the jail too, right?
Yes.
And you kind of alluded to it a little bit yesterday with your testimony, but I think you described it really well in a letter that you wrote your sister on May 10th, 2022. You wrote your sister out of essentially exasperation saying, quote, "It's been hard because how I was telling you, I feel like a damn animal."
Yes.
Quote, "Like this is inhumane. I literally cannot be around anyone, talk to anyone. When I come out of my cell, it's like walking into another cell."
Yes.
And you go on to tell your sister, quote, "I can't even see the daylight."
Yes.
And that was just 3 weeks approximately before your proffer with Investigator Burrows, right?
Yes.
And again, leading up to that proffer with Mr. Burrows and Mr. Perelia, again, you're missing significant milestones in your children's life.
Yes.
And at this point, you've been in custody for about 7 months, right?
Yes.
And the full magnitude of the situation has been very well made to you, right?
Yes. Yes.
You have lawyers, you have no bond, you know you are in it, right?
Yes.
And you know that what's at stake here is essentially your ability to watch your children grow.
Yes.
You know that what's at stake here is the ability for your children to have a mom who's not in prison.
Yes.
And 23 days before your proffer, you wrote a letter to your son about missing his kindergarten graduation on May 16th, 2022.
Yeah.
You also wrote a letter to Javier at the same time, right?
Yes.
And in that letter, you told Javier that you were, quote, bawling your eyes out, right?
Yeah.
And you described how your heart hurts because you were bawling your eyes out that your firstborn graduated from kindergarten and you didn't get to experience it.
Yes.
You wrote, quote, literally all these milestones and him graduating kindergarten being one of them. And I'll never be able to have that memory with him.
Yes.
And your kids then had to send you Mother's Day cards in jail, right?
Yes.
And there was nothing you could do about it, right?
Yes.
Until there was, right? On June 8th, 2022, you went to the Greeley Police Department, right?
Yes.
And that came after you had a conversation with your sister where she talked to you about the importance of not discussing your case with anyone in the jail. Remember that?
Yes.
Your sister told you, don't say anything about your case to people in the jail because they would use it against you to get time off their own sentence.
Yes.
Meaning your sister is telling you months before that June 8th proffer, if you that this is how it works. You tell people information and you get time off of your sentence
Yep.
to make your own legal situation better, right?
Yes.
And you told your sister that you were also hearing that from the guards as well at the jail, right?
Yeah.
And so you go to the Greeley Police Department after your attorney had set up this proffer, right?
Yes.
You didn't call the district attorney personally, right?
No.
You had to go through your lawyers, right?
Yes.
And your lawyers were the ones who actually broached the subject with you, right?
Yes.
And that proffer at the Greeley Police Department was approximately 7.5 hours long.
Yes.
You were there for a long time, right?
Yes.
And Mr. Burrows walked in and introduced himself, right?
Yes.
And then the district attorney who you signed the proffer contract with also came and introduced himself, right?
Yes.
Do you see him in this courtroom?
Yes.
Can you point to, or can you tell the jury where he is seated and describe a piece of clothing he's wearing?
He's seated at the end and he's wearing gray suit.
So that was the district attorney who came in and gave you this opportunity, right?
Yes.
And were you aware that Mr. Perelia and your attorney, Miss Lilly, used to be colleagues?
No.
Were you aware that Miss Lilly used to work for this very district attorney's office?
I knew she was used to be a DA.
Okay. And so she didn't, or you didn't know that they were actually coworkers together, right?
No, I don't ask questions like that.
Okay. And the entire first half of your proffer was essentially what I would classify, and please let me know if it's wrong, a narration. Does that sound right?
Yep.
So Mr. Burrows said, tell me everything, right? I'm not going to ask you any questions initially. Just you tell me what happened,
Yes.
right? And you talked for quite some time, right?
Yes.
About 43 minutes of just continuous narration about what happened, right?
Yes.
And during that 43-minute narration, you had your chance to just get everything out on the table, right?
Yes.
No time limits,
No.
no interruptions, right?
No.
And again, your lawyers had prepped you for going, right?
Yes.
To this moment. They didn't just meet you at the Greeley Police Department without prepping you, right?
Not really necessarily prepping. It just showed me pictures of Christopher and
Right.
said to him,
And they explained to you what a proffer was going to look like, right?
yeah.
And they explained to you the importance of being very detailed about what happened,
Yes.
and also about what particular points are going to be important for you to talk about.
No, I don't remember them saying them.
And during that 43-minute narration, you never mentioned asking Stacy when she realized that she wanted to kill Mr. Dickerson.
I believe I did say that.
In fact, you waited. Well, let me ask you this. It wasn't until just about after the 3-hour mark of your proffer that you told Mr. Burrows that you had asked Stacy about the moment she wanted to kill Mr. Dickerson, right?
Yeah.
And so the initial part of the interview, 43 minutes, the narration, you never once tell him, hey, I had actually asked Stacy, at what point did you decide you wanted to kill Mr. Dickerson?
In the first 43 minutes, I never mentioned it.
You never mentioned it.
Okay.
Does that sound right?
Yeah.
Okay. And that just came to you when Mr. Burrows was asking you questions about how many times Mr. Dickerson slapped your rear end, right?
Yes.
And you spontaneously said, now I remember. I asked her once, when did you realize that you were going to kill him?
Yeah.
Now that you remember, right?
Yes.
And it just so happened that you remembered that point after you had a 30-minute break approximately with your attorney, Miss Lilly, right?
Yes.
So Detective Burrows is asking you questions and going through sort of a second time after you mentioned, so let me take that back. When Detective Burrows is asking you questions and going through things a second time, you had essentially just forgot that your co-defendant for murder had told you that she randomly decided to kill a guy in the back seat of a car on the way back to the house.
Yeah.
And it was in fact so out of the blue that Detective Burrows asked you, so wait, we're talking about after? Like you asked him or asked Stacy after this all happened, right?
Yeah.
And you again reiterate, yeah, I just remembered, right?
Yeah.
And the reality is, ma'am, you offered this information to Mr. Burrows because you knew it mattered, right?
It was the right thing to do.
Because it mattered, right?
Yeah.
You had been charged with first-degree murder, right?
Yes.
Your attorneys certainly went over what first-degree murder means, right?
Yes.
The elements of the crime.
Yes.
And you had received a copy of the complaint listing out your charges from the court.
Yes.
And you, again, knew specifically Mr. Burrows and Mr. Paralia, the prosecutor, were going to be particularly interested about at what point Stacy decided or formed the intent to kill someone, right?
I would assume, yeah.
Yeah. And you also knew that you would be the only source of that information,
Yes.
right?
Yes.
You knew that that was essentially a hole to their case that only you could fill, right?
Yes.
Which is why 3 hours into the interview and after a 30-minute conversation with your attorney, you just suddenly remembered this important fact, right?
Yeah.
And deciding to kill someone during a car ride to give someone else a ride is a fairly odd thing, right?
Yeah.
Right? I mean, most people ride in cars with other people, give them rides, decide to randomly kill someone, right?
Yeah.
And you had told Mr. Burrows during your proffer that you actually even questioned in hindsight, like, why that moment?
Yeah.
Right? Because you were thinking that you were just going back to that house, or you guys were just going to go back to Mr. Dickerson's house and drink, right?
Yes.
And you told Mr. Burrows at one point during your proffer that you were okay with how things were going that night.
Yes.
And so it was sort of like this weird, illogical thing that Stacy was plotting to kill this guy in that very moment.
Exactly.
And you had told Mr. Burrows specifically that at that moment, there was, quote, good vibes,
Yes.
right? And I think yesterday you told this jury even that it was fun, right?
Yes.
You also told this jury yesterday, under oath, that Mr. Dickerson slapped your butt 1 to 2 times, right?
Yes.
That it was just a, quote, minor event,
Yes.
right? And when you spoke to Mr. Burrows during your proffer, you knew it was important to describe what happened very accurately,
Yes.
especially anything that could have been a source of potential conflict between Stacy and Mr. Dickerson.
Yes.
And you told Detective Burrows told you that he needed you to tell the truth, right?
Yes.
And the same truth that you took an oath yesterday to tell this jury, right?
Yes.
And again, you told this jury that Mr. Dickerson slapped your butt 1 to 2 times, right?
Yes.
All right. So during the proffer, again, proffer that you agreed to tell the truth at, you told Mr. Burrows that Mr. Dickerson slapped you in the rear end 4 to 5 times.
Yes. I heard more than 4 times. Yeah.
You said, quote, it was probably like 4 or 5,
Okay.
right?
Yes.
You described to Mr. Burrows during your proffer interview back on June 8th, 2022, that he touched your rear end every single time you stood up, right?
Yeah.
So much so that you described to Mr. Burrows, Mr. Dickerson, as, quote, very touchy, right?
Yeah.
And just to clarify, ma'am, Stacy never saw him do this, right?
She never told me she saw him. I assumed she did.
You assumed she did, right? That's what you're telling this jury today, right?
Yes.
But back on June 8th, 2022, when you met with Mr. Burrows, you told him that Stacy wasn't looking, right?
Yeah.
You told Mr. Burrows that Mr. Dickerson was only doing it when Stacy wasn't looking.
Yes.
And since Stacy didn't see Mr. Dickerson touch you inappropriately, you claim that Mr. Dickerson was also turning the conversation to you that evening, right?
Yes.
Because she couldn't have been mad and jealous if she didn't see him do this, right?
Right.
So then she had to get mad at something, right?
Yeah.
And so she had to get mad because he was asking you questions about where you worked and not her.
Yes.
And you claim that Stacy was getting mad because he was showing more attention to you than her.
Yes.
Because again, if Stacy wasn't upset for something, it'd be really odd for her in the backseat of that car to be like, I'm going to kill this guy, right?
Yeah.
And in also making this claim, it really portrays Miss Rodriguez as sort of a jealous person, right?
Yeah.
Right? And about halfway through your proffer interview with Mr. Burrows, he took you back to the beginning of the night of October 2nd, right?
Yeah.
Including about you and Stacy being at Cubetta's.
Yes.
And whether you and Stacy were ordering drinks there,
Yeah.
right? And you told Mr. Burrows that you remember getting drinks.
Yes.
And you were asked by Mr. Burrows, like, how did you pay for them then, right?
Yeah.
And you told Mr. Burrows that Stacy would usually have men buy the two of you drinks.
Yes.
And when asked how she would go about doing that, you said that Stacy would flirt with guys to get them to buy you 2 drinks, right?
Yes.
She wasn't very good at it though, right?
No.
And so she would have you actually flirt with guys to get them to buy you drinks, right?
Yes.
None of those guys ended up dead, right?
No.
And again, you went to this proffer because you knew that prosecution's case had some pretty big holes, right?
Yeah.
Because the reality was there was only 3 people in that house that night, right?
Yes.
Mr. Dickerson wasn't around to tell what happened, right?
Yes.
It was either you or Miss Rodriguez, right?
Yes.
And at the beginning of the proffer interview, Mr. Burrows even admitted to you he had what he called, quote, holes, right?
Yes.
And that's where the information that you were providing was going to come in,
Yes.
right? And one such hole was essentially, was there any sort of hostility leading up to Mr. Dickerson's death, right?
Yeah.
You know, what happened? What triggered all this, right?
Yes.
And all you could tell Detective Burrows during your proffer was that, quote, it was kind of weird why Stacy was thinking at that moment she wanted to kill him, right?
Right.
Because again, there was these good vibes happening, right?
Right.
However, an hour and a half earlier in your proffer, you said something completely different. Remember that?
No.
Okay. Do you remember an hour and a half earlier telling Mr. Burrows that when Mr. Dickerson got the phone call from his friend who needed the ride, you were already feeling uncomfortable?
Yes.
And quote, in fact, your exact quote was really uncomfortable.
Yeah.
That you were feeling really uncomfortable and you just wanted to leave, right? Yeah?
Yeah.
It's like 3 o'clock in the morning. You two are younger females at this strange older man's house, right?
Right.
And you got there and there was no after party happening, right?
Right.
You guys were under the impression he had a roommate, and there was no roommate there either.
Right.
It was kind of weird, kind of uncomfortable, very uncomfortable, or really uncomfortable in your own words, right?
Yes.
And so you actually didn't even want to go pick up the friend with Mr. Dickerson, right?
Right.
And after the trip to go give this woman a ride, things didn't really get any better in terms of your comfort levels, right?
I feel like I felt the same.
Okay. Actually, you described to Mr. Burrows this kind of uncomfortable and uneasiness around Mr. Dickerson escalating when you saw him in the bathroom, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. You were sitting on the couch in the living room, right?
Yes.
And that couch kind of had it was a small house, right?
Yeah.
And so you could see in the bathroom when the door was open nearby.
Yes.
And you described to Mr. Burrows Mr. Dickerson's actions in the bathroom as, quote, off.
Yeah.
You told Detective Burrows, quote, I was already uncomfortable and he's already been touching me. And the way I seen him in the bathroom was just off.
Yeah.
And it was something about how he was washing his hands caught your attention and made you feel, as you put it, weird, right?
Right.
During this proffer interview, you described to Mr. Burrows that something was just, quote, something weird about him, right?
Right.
You told Mr. Burrows that Mr. Dickerson was, quote, very different, right?
Yeah.
And then as the proffer goes on, right, a couple hours in, your description of Mr. Burrows changes, right? I'm sorry, not Mr. Burrows, of Mr. Dickerson changes. Is that fair to say?
Yeah.
Okay. And it changes when Mr. Burrows directly asked you about Mr. Dickerson's demeanor that night.
Yeah.
Mr. Burrows directly asked you, well, what kind of guy did he seem? Right?
Yeah.
And of course, your description of Mr. Dickerson at that moment changes because Mr. Burrows is directly asking you that question, right?
I was just remembering what I remembered about him.
Because you know the police didn't want to hear about Mr. Dickerson making you feel very uncomfortable or giving you the creeps, essentially, right?
I don't know.
You think that they want to hear about their victim being a creep towards you?
I didn't know what they wanted to hear. I was just telling my story and what I remembered.
Okay. And you changed from Mr. Dickerson being, quote, weird, making you really uncomfortable, to Mr. Dickerson being a, quote, good guy, right?
Yeah.
Your description of Mr. Dickerson that night changed from being, quote, very different and weird and something weird about him to Mr. Dickerson seeming like a, quote, genuine and caring person.
Yeah.
And your answers changed about Mr. Dickerson's demeanor that night to fit the narrative that you believed the police wanted to hear.
No.
No?
No.
Okay, well, let's keep going then about how the ways you sold your story to police to, again, fit what you believed they wanted to hear, okay? Rather than simply just giving the police a description of what happened, you certainly elaborated, didn't you?
Yeah.
Yeah. Your elaboration, ma'am, painted Stacy as essentially pure evil, right?
Right.
Right?
Yeah.
And Mr. Aurelia left quite a bit of the details out when he spoke to you, but I want to get into these details, okay? You described Stacy having blood on her hands and in her nails, right?
Yeah.
And you elaborated that while Stacy had blood on her hands and her nails, she's just glowing, right?
Yeah.
You told this jury yesterday that she just looked refreshed and excited that she had just killed this person, right?
Yes.
With blood everywhere, right?
Yeah.
And that was consistent with what you told Mr. Burrows, right?
Right.
That Stacy was excited that she had just killed someone,
Yeah.
right? Refreshed that she had just taken someone's life, right?
Right.
And if that's not bad enough, you kept going, didn't you? Right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Even more horrifying, right? You, again, told Mr. Burrows that after Stacy killed Mr. Dickerson, she, quote, tasted his blood,
Yes.
right? So here she is, just randomly killing someone after deciding on the way home from a car ride that she's going to kill this guy for no reason. She's got blood all over her hands and nails, and now she's dramatically licking her hands and saying his blood tastes dirty, right?
I just seen her lick her hand, and I asked her about it later.
Yeah, and you told Mr. Burrows that she said his blood tasted dirty,
Yeah.
right? So now we're talking some like straight Hannibal Lecter stuff, right?
Right.
Yeah. And you kept going, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Because if killing someone randomly and killing and drinking another human's blood wasn't evil enough, you also described it to Mr. Burrows after the fact, after the house is burnt down, you two essentially leaving, and you look over and you see Stacy has the blood on her hands, right?
Right.
And you dramatize Stacy looking at her hands and catching you looking at her as she's looking at her own hands, right?
Right.
Yeah. And you dramatically add that it was at that moment that Stacy was like, all right, I'm going to be honest with you, right?
Right.
Yeah. She's dramatically blood all over her hands. She catches you looking at her, and she said, this isn't the first time I've killed before, right? Something along those lines, right?
Yes.
Yeah. In fact, you told Mr. Burrows pretty extraordinarily that this 19-year-old girl that you had been in a relationship was confessing to you to have taken other people's lives before,
Right.
right? And not even just once, right?
No.
No. You say that Stacy's like, let me be clean with you. I've killed maybe about 4 or 5 other people, right?
Yeah, she said 4 people.
Yeah. So now, not only is she a Hannibal Lecter drinking blood of another person that she just randomly killed, but now she's also a serial killer, right?
Right.
And that's what you're telling Mr. Burrows, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And here you are, you had just, again, completely observed, according to you, this unprovoked, gruesome, blood-drinking serial killer in action, right?
Right.
And you described to Mr. Burrows sort of your immediate reaction to learning this from Stacy, right?
Right.
You're in the car, everything had just gone down, right? You're hearing this now, right?
Right.
And you told Mr. Burrows that you sort of acted in a way that you were cognizant of not wanting to startle Stacy, right?
Right.
You described Stacy essentially like waiting for your reaction to see if you believed her or not.
Yeah.
And that you were mindful not to be like, oh my gosh, are you serious?
Yeah.
Those are your words, right?
Yes.
Instead, you recounted telling Stacy in that moment that you, quote, kind of knew, right?
Yeah.
Or, quote, something real calm like that.
Yeah.
That's how you're describing it to Mr. Burrows during the proffer, right?
Yes.
And just very casually, right?
Right.
You described her response being like, oh, really? Right?
Right.
So just paint this for the picture for the jury. So your girlfriend who just killed someone is telling you that she has killed 4 other people, loves drinking blood, right? Apparently. And she's like telling you this, and you're like, oh yeah, I kind of knew, I kind of figured that. And you're like, and she's like, oh yeah, really?
Yeah.
You knew that the whole time about me and you were okay? You still love me, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. And you told Mr. Burrows that you had this response of being calm, casual, and supportive so that you felt like Stacy could open up about it more, right?
Right.
Talk about it.
Yeah.
Yeah. Like you were telling your partner that you knew that she didn't like your cooking the whole time you were together, that kind of casual conversation.
Yeah.
Yeah. And despite your strategy, you never learned anything else, right?
No, I had my lawyers look into it, and it wasn't true.
Yeah. And you also never got any details from Stacy, right? You were never following up like, well, ma'am, who did you kill?
Yeah,
Who else did you kill?
she did tell me.
You never told that to Mr. Burrows, right?
I don't recall.
No. You never told him anything about any alleged prior mass killings, right?
Yeah,
Right. But internally, you described to Detective Burrows having a very different reaction, right?
right.
You told Mr. Burrows that in your mind, you were screaming.
Yeah,
That your initial reaction to hearing that your partner was now on her 4th or 5th killing, including in front of you, was sort of this internal screaming and realization that you had let this person around your children,
right.
right? And as a mother, your children have to be your number one priority, right? Like you are tasked with their safety and well-being, right?
Right.
And at that point, you hear this and you're having this sort of internal crisis, and understandably, you can't change things, right?
Right.
You can't go back and fix the fact that this person had been around your children, right?
Right.
What's done is done at that point, right?
Yeah.
But you certainly can going forward, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So I'm going to ask to approach with what I've marked as Defendant's Exhibit V as in Victor, and I've shown Mr. Aurelia.
And I'm sorry, you said V as in Victor?
Yes, sir.
Yes,
Thank
go
you.
ahead.
Take a look at that. Let me know you've had a chance to review it. Ma'am, do you recognize what that is?
Yes.
Okay. And is that a picture that you took of Miss Stacy Rodriguez and your 2 children trick-or-treating in downtown Greeley?
Yes.
And you took that picture, and so you know it's fair and accurate depiction of the picture you took, right?
Yes.
Okay. At this time, I'd move to admit Defendant's Exhibit V as in Victor and request to publish.
Any objection to that exhibit?
No.
All right, the court will admit into evidence defense V, and you may publish at your discretion.
Bless you. So, ma'am, those are your 2 children, right?
Yes.
Okay. And your 2 kids we see here, your son's dressed as Batman, and I can't tell what your little daughter is from here, maybe a Disney character. Is that
Yeah.
fair?
Yeah.
And this is Miss Rodriguez and your children at downtown Greeley's trick-or-treat event, right?
Yes.
And if I gave you the date of October 29th, 2021, does that sound about right?
Right.
Right. And so knowing that this person you claim killed someone completely unjustified, you're letting your children stand there and pose at trick-or-treating, right?
Right.
This person who you want this jury to believe just randomly decided to kill Mr. Dickerson on a car ride back in the middle of the night, you're letting your children go trick-or-treating with them.
Right.
This person who's drinking the blood, you're telling this jury under oath, you saw her pull some Hannibal Lecter stuff, drinking blood, saying it's dirty after she just unprovokedly murdered. And you're just letting her around your children.
Right.
Thank you. I have one moment, Judge.
Sure.
And ma'am, it's probably fair that Mr. Pirelli is going to get back up here and say something to you along the lines of, Stacy insists on going trick-or-treating with you that night, right?
Yeah.
And you were there, right?
Yes.
So you could kind of monitor, it's fair to say, what was happening with your children.
Right.
That's a fair thing, right? A fair point. And your kids were safe because this was out in public, right?
Right.
right? You certainly weren't going to leave your kids alone with Stacy, though, right?
Right.
Not after seeing all that, right?
Right.
Ma'am, I'm going to show you another exhibit, okay? And this one, Your Honor, is going to be Defendant's Exhibit W,
W, okay.
then Walter, and I'm showing Mr. Perelia. May I approach?
Yes, go ahead.
Ma'am, take a look at that conversation between you and Ms. Rodriguez. Ma'am, that's a conversation or a screenshot that you took of a conversation between Ms. Rodriguez and yourself, right?
Right.
And that was on November 7th, 2021.
Right.
That's one, right? Yeah. So a month after all this happens, right?
Right.
Right. And you know that's Ms. Rodriguez because you obviously took the picture, right?
Yeah.
You were having this conversation, right?
Right.
So that's a fair and accurate depiction of a conversation that you were having with Ms. Rodriguez on November 7th, 2021, right?
It doesn't show the date on my end.
Okay. Would it assist you to see a copy of the what we call metadata that has the date it was created?
The date I screenshotted it,
Yes.
but what about the date on the message?
The date that it was created. There's no message, right? You took this screenshot, right?
Yeah.
Right. So you were controlling the date on it, right?
Okay. The date I took the screenshot. Yeah.
Yeah. Right.
Yes.
And is that a fair and accurate depiction of the screenshot that you took of this particular conversation between Ms. Rodriguez and yourself?
Yes.
At this time, I would move to admit Defendant's Exhibit W.
Any objection to W?
No.
All right, the court will admit into evidence defense W and may publish at your discretion.
Can you publish, please? And ma'am, what this says is Miss Rodriguez, it's her picture at the very top, right?
Yes.
You call her, at this point, she was labeled in your phone as baby, right?
Right.
Not baby Joker, right? Right. And you say, and Miss Rodriguez is asking you if it's okay if she showers while your daughter sleeps, right?
Right.
And you said yes, right?
Yeah.
And you ask her, can you check on Anaya?
On IE.
I'm sorry for that mispronunciation, right?
Yes.
And again, in this message, you're asking Miss Rodriguez to check on your daughter, right?
Right.
And as you pointed out to the jury, there's no date on this, right?
Right.
All we have is the date that you created the Snapchat, right?
Right.
Or the snapshot of this picture.
Right.
But there were certainly times where you did leave your children with Miss Rodriguez after all this happened, right?
I don't recall ever leaving them.
You don't recall
I
leaving
was
them
always with them after the fact,
after the fact.
but I have left them alone with her before.
Yeah. We can take that off. Thank you. And while at Mr. Dickerson's residence, your response to what you were seeing was also pretty extraordinary, wasn't it?
Right.
Yeah. When you met with Mr. Burrows, do you recall him showing you pictures of Mr. Dickerson's house from like a realtor app?
Yes.
And he was showing you these to see if they were similar to the layout that you recall from the night of October 3rd, right?
Right.
And you told Mr. Burrows that they were in fact, right?
Yeah.
Nothing had changed in the house, right?
No.
And you sort of used these pictures to sort of orient him to where everyone was, right?
Right.
Would you recognize those pictures?
Yes.
And they were probably in your discovery too, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. This time I am showing Mr. Perlio what's been marked as proposed exhibits, defendant's exhibits, X as in X-ray, Y as in U, and Z as in zebra.
All right, thank you. Go ahead.
May I approach?
Yes, go ahead.
You all set, ma'am?
Yes.
Okay. And are those fair and accurate depictions of the pictures you were presented of Mr. Dickerson's house by Mr. Burrows during that June 8th, 2022 proffer?
Yes.
At this time, move to and request to publish.
Any objection to X, Y, and Z?
No.
All right, the court will accept into evidence defense X, Y, and Z, and you may publish at your discretion.
Thanks, Jess. Okay, so sorry about that. So what we are looking here is defendant's exhibit Z, right?
Right.
And this is Mr. Dickerson's kitchen, right?
Right.
Wasn't probably decorated like that at the time, right?
No.
This is very clearly some sort of like staging, presumably, right?
Right.
Right. But the layout is all the same, right?
Yes.
Okay. And so you're in this very kitchen the entire time Ms. Rodriguez is killing Mr. Dickerson, right?
Right.
Right. And if we can go to Y, please. So this is defendant's exhibit Y, and as you'd agree with me that this is the living room, right?
Right.
And again, it wasn't decorated like this back then, right?
Right.
But what you can see here is the living room and the kitchen were essentially just separated by this little doorless entryway, right?
Right.
And again, this is a really small house, right?
Yeah.
And you're in the kitchen by yourself when you hear everything going on in the living room, right?
Right.
And you know what's going on, right?
Yeah.
And you know what's going on because as you described very vividly, you could hear the sounds of rubber and bone, right?
Yes.
And we can go back to Z, please. Yeah. The kitchen. Thanks. And yet, you just remain in this kitchen, right?
Right.
And you described for the jury that you sort of had your back towards these cabinets,
Right.
right? And you could hear what's going on, and there's a door right there, right? That green door?
Yes.
That's the green door that goes to the garage, right?
Right.
And while you're in this kitchen, Ms. Rodriguez is clearly preoccupied, right? You
Right.
have your phone on you, right?
Right.
You don't call 911.
Right.
You don't text your sister for help.
No.
You don't text your mom for help.
No.
You don't text Javi for help, right?
No.
You're just standing there in this kitchen, right?
Right.
And you explained to this jury earlier that the reason why you didn't take the garage door and leave and go get help or run for your own safety was because you didn't know how the garage door worked,
Right.
right? But ma'am, when you came into the house with Mr. Dickerson that evening, you guys came in through the garage,
Right.
right? So you saw him, you saw exactly where he would have opened and shut the garage door, right?
No, I don't remember how he opened it.
You were there, right?
I didn't know if he had a button or if it was a code.
Right. And so all you would have had to do is go out there and see if it was a code or a button, right?
Right.
And you would agree with me that we've all been inside garage doors or garages, right?
Right.
And the keypad is normally on the outside of a garage, not the inside,
Right.
right? So all you would have had to do was press a button and go get help, right?
Right.
And this was also a fairly populated neighborhood, right?
Right.
It was a residential neighborhood, right?
Right.
You're not out in the middle of the sticks somewhere,
Yes.
right? All you have had to do is either run out this door that we see, or if we can go to X, please. This is a different aerial view of the very small living room, right?
Right.
And there's the front door right there, right?
Yes.
And so even if you were in the kitchen and you're like, I don't know how to open the garage door, it's right there. The front door is right there, right?
Yeah.
Maybe, I don't know, 7, 8 feet, right?
Yeah.
And Stacy's preoccupied, right?
Yeah.
And all you have had to do, ma'am, is go out that front door and go to any of those houses that we see,
Yeah.
right? I have one moment, Judge.
Sure.
Now, yesterday, ma'am, you also told this jury under oath that when, instead of running for help, you wait in the kitchen until Stacy tells you to come back into the living room, right?
Yes.
And again, we have the blood drinking episode, and then you go back in the kitchen, and then you come back out a second time, right?
Yes.
And by this time, Mr. Dickerson's dying, right? He's dead or close to it, right?
Yes.
Yeah. And so you told this jury under oath that you saw Miss Rodriguez rummaging through his pockets, right?
Yeah.
And you told this jury under oath that she took his wallet, right?
Yes.
This wallet? That was never taken? Is it actually in evidence at the Greeley Police Department? You saw her, this is the one she took, right?
Yeah.
This is it? You also told, while I have this out, this jury that you saw Miss Rodriguez steal a Walmart gift card, right?
Yes.
And that she bought all these bleach and stuff to destroy what she had taken, right? That was your story, right? So she takes the Walmart gift card because she stole this wallet, right? But she leaves all these other gift cards, right?
I guess.
She leaves this one that's $100 master gift card, right?
I guess so.
She leaves, see if I can shake it a little bit for you. Would it be possible to open this? Or you're not allowed to because you're not GPD anymore? She leaves another Walmart gift card, right? She leaves multiple gift cards to Sprouts, right? She leaves a bunch of gift cards, right?
Yeah.
She just randomly picks out one Walmart gift card, right?
Yeah.
You also claimed that after she's stealing his wallet, right, that you go with with Stacy to Mr. Dickerson's room, right?
Right.
But it's kind of weird because at one point you tell this jury you're just stuck standing there watching Mr. Dickerson die, but then you also tell them you're going to her room and are helping her essentially rummage through her stuff, right?
Right.
And you described going around his bed, right?
Yes.
And you find a gun, or what you think is a gun, on his nightstand, right?
Right.
And let's put this into perspective for the jury, okay? You just again, ma'am, witnessed this horrific, according to you, unjustified, completely unprovoked killing, right?
Yeah.
You witnessed your girlfriend coming in, glowing with a broken weapon, excited, right?
Right.
You witnessed her drinking his blood and saying it tastes dirty, right?
Yeah.
And what do you do? What do you do when you see a gun? You say, "Hey, Stacy, I found a gun," right?
Yeah, I showed her it.
You showed her a gun. This wild, crazed, unprovoked murderer, you're showing her a deadly weapon, right?
Right.
You told Detective Burrows that Stacy noticed that you weren't very helpful in looking through Mr. Dickerson's belongings, right?
Right.
You told Mr. Dickerson that it was all Stacy who gave you the backpack, right?
I told who?
Mr. Burrows, that Stacy gave you the backpack just happened to be full of stuff, right?
Right.
And that's what you told this jury yesterday as well, right?
Right.
And that Stacy told you to just go out in the car and wait.
Right.
Because you had no idea what was in the bag, right?
No.
Right? You're just standing there helpless, not involved in anything. You aren't doing anything wrong, right?
Right.
And that sure makes it helpful for the judge to hear all this when you come back for that 35B, right? And ask for a reduction in your sentence, right?
Just telling the truth.
Yeah, your truth, which is making her seem like the absolute most evil villain in the world, right? And
the
yourself a victim, right?
Witness answer.
Yes, can you give the witness an opportunity to answer your questions, Ms. Devereaux?
I'm just here to tell the truth.
Yeah. And so you told everyone, Mr. Burrows, this jury, that you exit Mr. Dickerson's residence and you go to the car, right?
Yes.
And we see it on video, right? As you're aware, you've seen Discovery, right?
Yes.
And so at this point, ma'am, you are completely physically removed from Miss Rodriguez, right?
Yes.
She's inside the house and you're in a car, right?
Right.
A car that you know that works because you just drove there, right?
Yes.
And Stacy gave you the keys, right?
Right.
And you don't drive off to escape.
No.
You just saw her licking someone's blood that she just killed, and you don't drive to the Greeley Police Department and say, "Help us"?
I did not.
You don't go to Javi's house and say, "Oh my God, my high school sweetheart, help me, keep me safe." Look, right?
I didn't.
You don't go to your mom, you don't go to your sister, you just sit there, right? And you also have your phone, right?
Yes.
And Mr. Burrows actually asked you about that when you during your proffer, right?
Yeah.
Do you remember him asking you, like, did you have your phone in the car while you were waiting?
Yes.
And Mr. Burrows kind of checked in. I was like, "Is your phone working okay?" You know, that kind of, and you're like, "Yeah," right?
Right.
And Mr. Burrows even asked you, "Why didn't you call the authorities? Why didn't you call for help?" Right?
Yeah.
And your answer, ma'am, was, quote, "I don't know if it ever crossed my mind."
Right.
It just didn't cross your mind to call 911 after you just witnessed someone be unjustifiably killed?
No, not in that moment.
You just heard and described for the jury, hearing this man taking his last gargling breaths, right?
Yes.
And you cried out front of them, right?
Yes.
And yet you don't call 911?
I did not.
Just doesn't cross your mind.
It did not.
And when Mr. Burrows is asking you about this, you realize that this doesn't sound very logical, right? It's not very logical that you wouldn't call the police in that moment, right?
Yeah, I guess so.
Right? Just like Mr. Perelia was asking you questions about, not calling the police if this was a justified killing, right?
Right.
Right. And Mr. Burrows tells you and kind of gives you a heads up that this is going to be what's called a quote hard question, right?
Right.
He kind of gives you this heads up that eventually you're going to be here in this very moment having to answer this hard question about why if this went down the way you said it did, why wouldn't you call them for help?
Yeah.
Right. And there's obviously one easy answer, right? You were scared, right?
Yes.
Sure, Mr. Pirelli will come up and ask me some questions about that, right?
Yeah.
And an hour and 15 minutes after Mr. Burrows directly told you that you were going to have to come up with an answer for these, quote, hard questions, you did, right? A different one. Mr. Burrows asked, so were you with her after this happened? Were you seeing your kids regularly? Are you with Stacy every day? Do you remember that?
Yes.
Your Honor, can we approach, please? What's your name, Ms. Varela?
Good afternoon.
So it's been a couple hours, so I want to take you back to this morning, and we were discussing how with Mr. Burrows, you were trying to come up with an answer to his hard question of why you didn't call the police after all this happened, right?
Yeah.
And my questions were specifically related to the evening of October 2nd and 3rd, right?
Yes.
And again, as we said this morning, an easy answer and an obvious answer is that you were scared, right?
Yeah.
But an hour and 15 minutes after Detective Burrows directly told you that you were going to have to come up with an answer for these hard questions, Detective Burrows also asked you, quote, so you were with her after this happened. Were you seeing your kids regularly? Are you with Stacy every day? Do you remember him asking you that?
Yes.
And in response, at that point, again, over 5 hours into your proffer interview, you tell Detective Burrows that you were with Stacy every day after this happened, right?
Yes.
And you started giving Detective Burrows, again, 5 hours into your proffer, specific examples of Stacy just never leaving you alone to go to the police.
Yeah.
You described going to your mom's house to shower and Stacy sitting outside your house and waiting.
Yes.
You even added that Stacy would wait, quote, for hours outside your mom's.
Yes.
You claimed you couldn't spend any time with your kids because of it.
Yes.
You told Detective Burrows that Stacy would even sometimes wait down the street to make sure you wouldn't get out of your car when you dropped your children off at their father's house every night.
Yes.
You even described one time that you finally got to pick up your son from school by yourself. Remember that?
Yes.
And that during that one time when you finally got to pick up your son, again, alone from school, you decided to stop at Human Being for a coffee.
Yes.
And you told Detective Burrows that right when you got to Human Being, you got a text message from Stacy about being at Human Being.
Yes.
You described questioning how Stacy even knew that you were there, right?
Yes.
And you told Detective Burrows, I don't know if she even had a tracker on my phone,
Right.
right? And that turned into that you were, quote, pretty sure that she actually did have a tracker on your phone in hindsight, right?
Yes. Yes.
And you went on to claim that Stacy had then actually went to Human Being to find out how many coffees you bought.
No, she asked me how many coffees I bought, like if I was buying another one for somebody else.
Right, that was my question. Stacy was like, how many questions, or
But she didn't actually go to Human Being
Okay.
to see.
do you recall telling Detective Burrows on June 8th, 2022, quote, and she goes, meaning Stacy, I asked that person, like, how many coffees you got?
Yes.
Like, I was buying one for hobby, I think you mean if I was buying one for hobby, and I was like, I can't even, what if I'm buying one for my son?
Yeah.
So again, you told Detective Burrows that Stacy asked the person how many coffees you bought.
Yes.
And so essentially, or let me take you back to those notes, that diary notes that you described with Mr. Pirelli on direct examination, okay? You testified with him that you were writing these notes in sort of a diary format, right?
Yes.
And this was just something you did in general, right?
Yeah.
And you were doing that even before the incidents on October 2nd, right?
Right.
But then you started writing, I would say, fairly frequently in October and November, right?
Yes.
As you testified on direct, you were writing these knowing that eventually this was all going to come crashing down, right?
I was writing them mostly for my kids' dad because I was in fear that she was going to kill me. I knew she was going to kill me, and I was just ready for it. I had nobody else to talk to, and so it was just,
You wrote these, as you said, in direct examination because you knew the investigation would look into this, your phone, right?
that too, but my main, I was writing them for my kids' dad.
And I want to turn to, so your testimony is that you wrote these notes because, and purely because you were afraid that Ms. Rodriguez was going to kill you.
Yeah, and I had nobody else to talk to.
Okay. Then, have you seen a copy of this?
Which one is it?
These are the notes that we're talking about. So let me take you to note dated October 6, 2021, right?
Yeah.
That's the fairly long one that you wrote.
Yes.
And you wrote the date of October 6, 2021 in the note, right?
Yeah.
Because again, you knew at some point, potentially, you guys were going to get arrested and get caught, right?
Yeah.
Right. And what's interesting about this note is, again, this is the note that's you're saying is you being afraid that Stacy's going to kill you, right?
Yeah.
But you actually started that note and wrote that note. The creation date and the metadata is September 6, 2021, right?
Right.
And so essentially this note was actually a suicide note that you had sort of started ahead of time.
I believe it was when you start a note, and if it's like in a draft, and I would go back to the draft, like even if it was empty, like if I just had empty drafts or something, if I was going to start something. But I don't remember ever writing in September on that specific, when I was writing. I remember that day and I wrote that whole thing in full. I never went back and edited it.
So your testimony now is that it was just a matter of you starting it, but not actually writing anything on September 6th.
Yeah, like not really starting it, like if it was a draft, like in the notes.
Right.
That's the only thing, because I don't remember writing in September 6th about that.
Okay. But the beauty of this sort of evidence is that we can tell when you start a note and then you don't write anything, right? Because on October 3rd, 2021, you did that, right?
I wrote, wait, can you say that again?
Sure. So the beauty of this evidence is you can see when you actually do what you're describing, which is starting a note but not writing anything.
Yeah.
Because you did that on October 3rd, 2021,
Okay.
right?
Yeah.
Would it refresh your memory to look at a Celebrate report of your notes?
Can I see them?
Sure. May I approach?
Yes, go ahead.
This is 212 I'm refreshing your recollection with.
Sure.
No.
I'm going to direct you to line number 3. It is October 3rd, 2021, right? That's the date. And yet, there's nothing in it, right?
Right.
Do you remember, does that help you?
So that's the day I started it, and I didn't go back in. And
So
is that what you're saying?
take a look at it. I'll scan it with you. I'll leave it with you.
So the October 3rd is this one where I'm talking about I feel trapped. Is that the one that you're talking about?
No, I'll direct you again. May I approach, Your Honor?
Yeah.
Sure. You can approach freely for this purpose.
So it's entry number 3, note number 3, right?
Mm-hmm.
There's a date that says October 3rd, right?
Oh.
And there's no body.
Oh, I see what you're saying. Okay.
Okay.
Yeah.
And so again, how you can tell if there's anything added to a note is there's a section on the Cellrite report that says body of what the note contents are, right?
Yeah.
And on that October 3rd, 2021 date, there is no body, right?
Right.
There's just appearingly what seems to be a note that was started and never finished,
Okay.
right?
Yeah.
And your testimony today to this jury is that you wrote this note or these notes because you were afraid and sure that Stacy was going to kill you, right?
Yeah.
Then on this note number 5 specifically, you write a whole paragraph to her, right?
Right.
You say, and to Stacy, the love I have for you is unexplainable. You've literally been by my side every step of this whole 8 months, right?
Right.
Quote, you sat next to me while I drank and listened to me, right?
Right.
You went out of your way to help me, right?
Right.
You literally went through the same, or we literally went through the same shit together. You slept in the car with me knowing you had your own bed, right?
Right.
You offered to pick up my kids when I had no car, right?
Yeah.
To this day, you will put me first before yourself.
Right.
You go on to describe sort of the toxic nature of your relationship, right?
Right.
You say, it sucks because we both know we are toxic for each other.
Right.
We would never have worked out because you're not good for me.
Right.
You would have never built me into the woman I know I could have been.
Yeah.
The love I had for you, Stacy, wasn't fake because I did love you.
Right.
And I will always, you wrote depend, but I'm assuming you mean defend, because the next part of it is your name and love you.
Right.
Or I'm sorry, it says I will always depend your name and obviously keep it down for you.
Right.
I'm sorry you meet me at my lowest point in life. I'm assuming you meant met.
Yeah.
And I'm sorry we're both toxic for each other. I love you, Stacy. Right?
Yeah.
Nothing in any of these notes say Stacy's going to kill me. Right?
I just talked about the abuse.
Nothing in these notes say if someone finds this, go look in that direction. Right? Like that's not the purpose of this note. Right?
No, I was just venting and just wanting to let my family and my kids know that I loved them if anything had ever happened to me.
Anything meaning you were going to get arrested because of everything that you were a part of.
I was mostly fearful that I knew she was going to kill me. She already told me she was going to kill me. And so I was just waiting for that day.
So then why didn't you go to the police, ma'am?
I was just too scared. Everything that she was telling me, and I was believing her lies. And she had me so convinced that she's done this before and everything's going to be okay. She knows what she's doing, you know, and I was scared and I should have went to the police.
And especially if you thought she was going to kill your children, right?
No, Javier.
So your testimony is that you didn't think she was going to kill your children?
She never threatened my kids until I came into jail.
What about when you're concerned she's going to kill the father of your children, your high school sweetheart? You don't call the police then?
She just told me if I stop talking to him, if I keep talking to him, she's going to kill him. And
Okay.
so I stopped talking to him.
Now your testimony is that you stopped talking to Javier.
I tried to stop talking to him and I just told him we could only talk about the kids and nothing else.
And when you met with Investigator Burrows, you told him some of this, right?
Right.
Yeah. And you laid it all out there for Mr. Burrows in your 7.5 hour proffer, right?
Yeah.
And you specifically painted a picture that you could not, as we've heard, I think your exact words were lift a finger without Stacy knowing, right?
Right.
And that was part of your excuse as to why you didn't go to the police, right?
Right.
Okay. And ma'am, you've had an opportunity to review proposed defendants exhibits AA, BB, CC, DD, EE, FF, GG, HH, II, JJ, KK, and LL, and MM, right?
Yes.
Okay. And you had an opportunity to review those downstairs with your lawyer, right?
Right.
Okay. And you recognize what these are, right?
Yeah.
They are various portions of communications between yourself and Miss Rodriguez via Facebook Messenger between the dates of October 5th, 2021 and November 9th, 2021, right?
Right.
And are they fair and accurate depictions of the screenshots that actually you took of those communications?
Yeah, I remember. I don't remember some of the conversations or when I actually took the screenshot, but yeah.
Do they look like they've been altered and manipulated in any way?
I don't know when I took, or I don't know when the actual message happened, but I remember I started getting in the habit of taking screenshots because she started deleting stuff off of my phone.
And my question was, do these look like I've manipulated them at all? Does
No.
anything in the
No.
conversations? Okay, so these are fair and accurate depictions, right?
Yeah.
This time I'd move to admit AA through MM.
Ms. Devereaux, just to make sure I don't miss one, those are AA through MM inclusive, is that
Yes,
right?
please.
Okay. And any objection from the state apart from what you've already noted?
Not unless they're, no objection as long as they're properly published.
Okay. All right. The court will admit into evidence states AA through MM inclusive. And Ms. Devereaux, you may publish consistent with our previous conversation.
Thank you, Honor. I appreciate it. So again, you told this jury that and Mr. Burrows that Ms. Rodriguez would never leave you alone, correct?
Right.
Okay. I'm publishing right now. It's been marked as Exhibit AA. And Your Honor, would it be okay if we zoomed in on the actual message?
Yes, go ahead.
Thank you. So, ma'am, this is a or a face message communication between you and Ms. Rodriguez on Facebook on October 5th, 2021, right?
Yes.
And in this Facebook message, Stacy tells you, quote, tell her I said hi, right?
Yeah.
To whoever you're talking about, right? Meaning whoever you are with or seeing, Stacy wasn't there to tell her hi herself, right?
Right.
Let's go on to BB, please. Your Honor, can I have standing permission to zoom in?
Yes.
Thank you. And this one is a Facebook message on October 8th, 2021. And here, you and Stacy are messaging each other again, and this time she's telling you about her brother Miguel being in the shower, right?
Right.
And she's telling you about needing to change her mom.
Yes.
And again, you don't know this on October 8th, 2021 because you weren't with her, right?
Right. That's just the date that I took the screenshot because I don't remember when these messages were actually written when I was looking through them.
Okay. The next one is October 9th, 2021. I'm sorry, number CC. Okay. And this one, the screenshotted date is October 9th, 2021. And Stacy's telling you here, I'm gonna go put gas in the car, presumably, right?
Yeah.
And again, she's telling you she's going to get gas, and you don't know that because you're not with her, right?
Yeah.
Can we have DD, please? And here is October 9th, 2021 at 7:53 p.m. And this one actually has, or let me take that back. And this message you're saying, or you're telling Stacy, I'm home though, I promise, right?
Right.
And again, she doesn't know you're home because she's not with you, right?
Right.
Can we move to EE? And this is a screenshot you took on October 11th, 2021. And in this screenshot that you took on that date, you messaged Stacy saying, quote, I miss you too, how's it going, right?
Yeah.
Because again, you're not physically with her,
Right.
right? She goes on to tell you about her interactions with Vanessa, Roman, family members, right?
Yes.
And how essentially she tells you about Vanessa seeing your kids at Walmart, right?
Right.
And again, you're not with Stacy, right?
Right.
And then can we have FF, please? And this one is, again, more of this. And I'm going to actually skip to Gigi. Gigi, and you told this jury that, oh, it's just some of these screenshots. I don't know the date I took them, right? I just took them, and that's the date that was reflected that you took them, right?
Right.
But this video actually has a date on it, right?
Yeah.
And that date is October 13th,
Yeah.
right? And so the date actually, we can zoom in on the metadata. The video contents is confirmed by the same metadata that we're relying on, right?
Right.
And October 13th, 2021, this is a video of you at a park by yourself drinking Human Bean, watching your kids play on the playground, right?
Mm-hmm.
Is that a yes?
I don't know what that video. I haven't seen it.
Okay. Would it refresh your recollection to see that video?
Yeah.
Okay. This one is another Facebook communication between you and Miss Rodriguez, right?
Right.
And she's telling you, guess who HMU, which means hit me up, right?
Yeah.
And she's saying there's no parking in the back. She's describing what she's calling a crackhead, seeing a crackhead. And again, you don't know any of this because you guys aren't together, right?
Right.
That's why she's having to tell you that, right?
Yeah.
And if we can zoom out a little bit more. The date that the metadata says it's from is modified on October 22nd, 2021, right?
Yeah.
And there's actually a timestamp that says 5/26/10, right? UTC time.
Right.
Can we zoom back out again? And then can we go to the next one, please? This one's II. And this one, she's telling you about having some tamales and wishing you good luck, right?
Right.
And do you recall what she was wishing you good luck about?
No.
Okay. Do you remember anything about this tamale conversation at all?
Honestly, not really.
Okay. And what helps us here is we do have times on these ones, right?
Right.
So like that one was at 5:52, right?
Right.
And we know that was at 5:52 when you say why, right?
Right.
And this metadata says that it was created, modified on October 23rd at 5:14:28 p.m., right?
Right.
Which means the entire screenshot, which includes the conversation before you say why, right?
Right.
So it is consistent that the metadata says this conversation was happening or started, and you originally screenshotted it contemporaneously on that October 23rd, 2021 date, right?
Yeah.
And you weren't with her then, right?
Right.
Can we move on to the next one, please? Okay, thank you. Okay, so I want to go back to, I believe it was Gigi, the video of October 13th at 2021. Are you in the park with your kids? Would it refresh your recollection to actually watch the video that you took on October 13th?
Yeah.
Okay. For the record, sure, Mr. Cornelia. Can I approach?
Yes, go ahead.
Like,
Let me check. So is your memory refreshed now?
yeah. I don't see Stacy.
You're at the park by yourself with your kids, right? Drinking Human Bean.
I mean, it doesn't mean she wasn't there, but I didn't see her in the video. Yeah.
And you would, because the video is a really great spot of sees your shadow in it, right?
Yeah. I just went like that. It wasn't
Yeah. And you don't see any other shadow around you, right?
right.
And you're looking at the entire playground. She's not playing with your kids, right?
She wasn't.
Okay. So here we have another Facebook message, right?
Yes.
And the metadata says that this was modified on October 27th, 2021, right?
Yes.
And this one, essentially, you're sending her a picture of food that you made, right?
Yeah.
And you're saying, I did make food, but I still want to get pho with you, right?
Right.
And you're talking about dinner, right?
Yeah.
And the metadata for this picture is October 27, 2021, but specifically at 5:56 p.m., right?
Yeah.
That's dinner time, right?
Yes.
That's another way of verifying that this message was likely screenshotted at the time that the metadata reflects, right?
Right.
She wasn't with you then, right? Or else she would know that you made food, right?
Yeah.
And you were telling her, I still want to get pho with you, right?
Yeah.
She's not telling you, you better not go out and get anything without me being there, right? Or I'm going to kill you, right?
No, she never said that right there.
Right. Can we move on to KK, please? And KK, if we can make it bigger, please. You're telling her at 9:44 p.m., I'm dropping off your truck and going to my mom's, right?
Right.
She replies back a couple hours later, 11:33 p.m., saying a picture, and it's how she gonna eat 2 plates of yours but not even finish one of his. Do you remember that conversation?
Mm-mm.
Okay. She talking about your children here? Do you remember? Does that sound familiar?
No, I don't think she would be talking about my kids.
Okay. And as we can see, the metadata, again, it's in UTC time, right? It says here 10:33 p.m. The picture shows that this message was sent at 11:33 p.m. Do you remember when those messages were sent?
Where they were sent?
I'm sorry?
Did you say?
Sure. Do you remember if these messages were sent after Mr. Dickerson's death? Let's put it that way.
I don't remember.
Okay. Can we move on to LL, please? And LL, here's another conversation with Ms. Rodriguez, right?
Yes.
Can you make it bigger, please? And again, this one, you're not sure, or let me ask you this. She's saying, call you back my ass. How are you gonna say you feel like getting ready after you see the video of him and go out nice, all pretty? And again, she's telling you at the very end, have a bomb ass day, amour, right?
Yeah.
And that was like a term of endearment from her to you that she'd frequently call you.
Yep.
Now if we zoom out on this one, the metadata says that this was modified on November 6, 2021 at 3:02 UTC time, right?
Yeah.
That's obviously inconsistent with the time in the actual screenshot message, right?
Right.
Because the message says 2:56, but then we see 3:02, right?
Right.
But it would be consistent if you were to have taken the screenshot a couple minutes after getting the text message, right?
Right.
And again, Ms. Rodriguez isn't with you here either,
Right.
right? And can we have MM, please? Okay, this one is, again, another message from you, Ms. Rodriguez, and here she's calling you amour again, right?
Right.
Again, another term of endearment from her to you,
Right.
right? And for this one, she's telling you that she's going to eat and shower and wash the truck real quick, right?
Yeah.
And again, you don't know that because you're not physically with her, right?
Right.
And this particular message was sent, does it sound on November 9th, 2021? Does that sound right to you?
I don't remember.
Okay. Thank you. So, again, your testimony and communication, or what you told Mr. Burrows and the jury, is that essentially you couldn't lift a finger without Ms. Rodriguez knowing, right?
Right.
And you also told them that, or let me ask you this, while being physically away from Stacy, you did have a phone, right?
Right.
And a phone that worked, right?
Yes.
And a phone that you were sending text messages on to people.
Right.
And at no point did you send a text message to anyone saying, Ms. Rodriguez is going to kill me.
Right.
And in fact, after October 2nd, between October 2nd and your date of arrest, you got a text message from an Evans police officer on something completely unrelated, right?
Right.
And at no point did you text back to that Evans police officer and saying, hey, my life is in danger, right?
Right.
You never text that Evans police officer back and say, I just witnessed an unjustified murder, right?
Right.
Hey, Mr. Police Officer, I just found out my girlfriend's a serial killer, right?
Right.
And we know Stacy wasn't looking through your phone even when she was physically with you, right?
She would, no, not when physically with me.
She wasn't going through your phone, right?
Yeah, she was.
She was going through your phone.
Yeah.
Okay. How do you know that?
Because one day I'd woken up and I had all kinds of things deleted off my phone, and she told me that she was the one that did that.
Okay. And so you're saying that you know Miss Rodriguez went through your phone, right?
Right.
And I'm assuming you're saying that was part of the controlling nature of her relationship with you, right?
Right.
Right. But we know Stacy wasn't looking at your phone, and we know she wasn't controlling you by looking at your phone, because if she had, she would have known that you were talking to another male individual on Facebook named Mob Trujillo,
Right, and she did know that because she had pictures on her phone of the messages.
So your testimony today is that Miss Rodriguez knew that on October 3rd, 2021, the same day of Mr. Dickerson's death, you were offering to help Mr. Trujillo decorate his new residence.
Right,
And the next day, on October 4th, you told Mr. Trujillo that you were, quote, so down to go over to his place to, quote, do movies or something.
right,
And so you're telling this jury that this, again, really jealous, crazy serial killer who allegedly killed someone for asking you where your job was versus her, knew full well that you were talking to Mr. Trujillo on Facebook on October 6th, 2021,
yes.
on October 9th, 2021.
Yeah, she ended up finding out and actually messaged him herself. And
That's not my question, okay? October 11th, 2021,
yes,
October 12th, 2021,
yes,
October 13th, 2021,
yes,
October 16th, 2021,
yes,
October 23rd and 24th and 25th, 2021.
right,
And especially if Stacy was around you 24/7, controlling your every movement and looking through your phone like you're telling this jury, she certainly would have known that you were sending Mr. Trujillo some nude photos as well.
yeah, my older ones, yeah,
Yeah. And yet he's still alive and well, right?
yes,
Yeah. And you also told Mr. Burrows that you, going back to October 2nd, didn't actually want to find an after party after the bars closed. Do you remember that?
yes,
That you didn't want to find an after party because you had just slammed a bottle of Hennessy and you were already drunk.
yes,
And you didn't want to be around at Mr. Dickerson's house when you got there because, again, you were drunk and he was touching your butt, right?
right,
And at after you all returned from giving Mr. Dickerson's friend a ride, and this is, I'm going to take a step back. It's when you guys get back from giving his friend a ride that him and Miss Rodriguez and Mr. Dickerson go outside, right?
yeah.
That's when everything kind of starts, right?
It's kind of started after when they came back in.
Right. And you told Mr. Burrows that you had no idea what Mr. Dickerson and Miss Rodriguez were fighting about.
Right,
And you told the jury the same thing, right?
right,
And the next thing you know, Mr. Dickerson had Stacy pinned up against a wall.
right,
You described it to Mr. Pirelli on direct examination that Mr. Dickerson essentially wasn't any kind of threat to Miss Rodriguez, right?
yeah, I just remember him over her.
Right. But when you spoke to Mr. Burrows for your proffer on June 8th, 2022, you described it as Mr. Dickerson was almost like a bear over her, right?
Right,
Pinning her against the wall, right?
just kind of just over her, and she was up against the wall, yeah,
Right. Her back was up against the wall, right?
yes,
And you're seeing this go down, and at no point do you help your girlfriend.
I think I did try to step in and get him off of her.
Do you recall telling Detective Burrows back on June 8th, 2022, that you did not push him off of her?
Yeah, I did not push him off of her.
You didn't grab any weapons, right?
Right,
You didn't, in fact, according to your proffer, you weren't even yelling at the time.
right,
You didn't even yell at this guy, "Get off my girlfriend."
right,
And instead, what you tell Mr. Burrows is that after Stacy grabbed the beer bottle, all you say is just, "No, don't do that," right?
yeah, I told her, let's leave.
Right. And not once, but twice, you claim that you told Miss Rodriguez, "No, don't," right?
Right,
And you're the one who is just repeatedly telling Stacy to leave, right?
right,
And you painted this picture to Mr. Burrows on June 8th, 2022, that you were just trying to, quote, de-escalate the situation,
Right.
right? So if you're trying to de-escalate a situation, when Stacy told you to go get the weapon, you did.
Right.
Going to get a weapon, ma'am, is not de-escalating a situation, right?
Yeah.
And you, even during your proffer interview with Mr. Burrows, you minimize your conduct even on that point. And you say, quote, and I handed it to her not thinking,
Yeah.
right? At no point do you take accountability during your proffer with Mr. Burrows, right?
I said my part, and I wasn't thinking at the time.
And then, even after Mr. Dickerson was killed, you didn't do anything wrong, right? You're just waiting in the kitchen like we've discussed, right?
Right.
And when you were in the kitchen and Stacy comes in to look through the cabinets for a knife, again, you just stand there.
Yeah.
And when asked if you saw her use this separate secondary knife, you were like, I don't know, I was just standing in the kitchen, right? You weren't even looking through the doorway that we saw into the living room to see what was going on,
No.
even though the kitchen and the living room are just a couple of feet, right?
Right.
In fact, you told Mr. Burrows that you never saw Stacy using any weapon on Chris, right?
Right.
You were just that completely detached from what was going on.
I was in the other room.
You were detached, right? You weren't involved.
Right.
She was the bad person who was doing all this, right?
Right.
Right. And so detached from what was going on in the living room that you heard what you described to Mr. Burrows during your proffer as a, quote, commotion, right?
Yeah.
And yet you never leave the kitchen until Stacy calls out to you.
I went into the living room after I heard the commotion.
Right, after Stacy called out for you, right?
I don't know. I don't recall.
Do you recall Mr. Burrows during your June 8th, 2022 proffer asking you, quote, so you heard commotion and then does it prompt you to go out to the living room or does she ask you to go? And your answer is because she called me out.
Okay.
Does that sound right?
Yeah.
And again, you minimize your conduct even more because when Stacy is again rummaging through his pockets, you described yourself as just being there, right? That you were just in the zone, right?
Right.
And you further minimize your conduct when you go into the car and you're waiting for Stacy to come out. Specifically, you told Mr. Burrows that you're waiting and Stacy came out of the house and just started directing you where to drive.
Right.
That you don't know where you're going, right? It's completely quiet in the car is what you tell Mr. Burrows.
Right.
So you're not like, hey, what just happened in there, right?
Right.
You're not asking questions about where we're going.
No.
And instead, you claimed that Miss Rodriguez was essentially telling you directions like right, left, right, left.
Right.
And then somehow you end up at this gas station.
Right.
And you even go on to minimize your conduct with Mr. Burrows and tell him that you had no idea why she told you to go inside and pay for $1 worth of gas.
Right.
And that you were completely clueless as to why she was filling up 2 water bottles of gasoline.
That's the moment when I realized kind of what she was planning to do. She told me to go back.
Do you recall telling Mr. Burrows on June 8th, 2022, quote, and I go inside and I come out and put the $1 gas in and I come out and I see her filling up 2 water bottles of gasoline. And then I don't even think I processed at the time what she was going to be doing.
Right.
During your proffer interview, Detective Burrows asks you more about this whole gas station arson incident. He came back to it and specifically asked you whether Stacy was telling you what she was planning on doing when filling up the water bottles of gas. Do you remember that question?
Yeah.
He asked you, did you have any idea of possibility of what she was intending on doing, right?
Right.
And of course, Despite your answer to this jury just a moment ago, you told Investigator Burrows on June 8th, 2022, no, right?
Right.
That you had no idea of the possibility of what she was doing, right?
Yeah. She never told me what she had planned.
You even went so far as to claim that when you two went back to the house with, again, the gas bottles of gas, or the water bottles of gasoline, that you didn't see any flames, right?
Right.
You claimed to Mr. Burrows that you just didn't see any flames because you just didn't look at the house.
Right.
So now I want to turn to Mr. Dickerson's phone. Okay. You testified on direct examination that Stacy took 2 cell phones from Mr. Dickerson, right?
Right.
And also the wallet that we've talked about previously, right?
Mm-hmm.
And you had, at the point you talked to Mr. Burrows on June 8th during your proffer, you had read, I think you testified yesterday, and seen up to E65.
Right.
And for the jury's perspective, discovery comes in from the DA's office in batches, right?
Yeah.
And those batches are numbered, right?
Yes.
And so it starts at 1, right? Sorry, can you say yes or no?
Yes.
And it goes upward numerically, right?
Right.
And so you had seen 65 batches or groupings of discovery by the time you went to your proffer, right?
Right.
And so you knew that one of the things that the law enforcement was looking into was where Mr. Dickerson's debit card went, right?
Right.
And so they did things like getting farmers' bank records and credit card records, and you knew all that, right?
Right.
And so when you go into your proffer with Mr. Burrows, you again tell him that Stacy is the one who took all of these items, right?
Right.
And he even asked you, did you guys look, or let me ask you this. Sorry, I'll withdraw that. You told Mr. Burrows that how you knew Stacy took these things was because later on you had seen the ring, the debit card, and the phone in a backpack. Do you remember that?
I seen it laying out on the bed.
Right, at Miss Rodriguez's mom's trailer, right? Right. And you also described to Mr. Burrows an incident on the way to Walmart where Miss Rodriguez wanted you to turn on Mr. Dickerson's phone. Do you remember that?
Yes.
And you claimed to tell Mr. Burrows that you didn't remember why she wanted you to turn on his phone, right?
Right.
She just ordered you to do it and you did it,
Right.
right? And then you described, again, going to Walmart and using the Walmart gift card, right?
Right.
And you just testified a lot about how you had this fear of Miss Rodriguez, right?
Right.
How she was going to kill you, right?
Right.
And how, and specifically these weeks after Mr. Dickerson's death, right?
Right.
And so you were sort of just at the mercy of her, right?
Right.
Essentially. But when you described to Mr. Burrows the gift card incident, you told Mr. Burrows that you actually stood up to her at that point, right? You stood up to Miss Rodriguez, let me clarify for you, and said, I'm not using that. I'm not going to use that, meaning the Walmart gift card,
Right.
right? And that was the line in the sand for you, right? Using the Walmart gift card. And likewise, when Stacy asked you to pour bleach in the bucket, you stood up to her then as well, right?
Yes.
You told her, no, I'm not going to do that.
Right.
And when Stacy wanted to keep a lot of Mr. Dickerson's things, again, you told Mr. Burrows, I'm not keeping any of that,
Right.
right? You stood up to Miss Rodriguez 3 times after the death of Mr. Dickerson, right?
Right.
And you also stood your ground with Stacy and told her that if she had any of Mr. Dickerson's items in her Tahoe, you were not going to let your kids in that vehicle, right?
Right.
And so you had no qualms with standing up for Stacy, or against Stacy, or to Stacy, I should say, in the weeks leading up, or sorry, the weeks after Mr. Dickerson's death, right?
May I explain?
Sure.
In that moment, when she showed me the broken weapon, that's when I knew to not show no more fear. And so, yeah, I did stand up to her a couple of times.
And you told Detective Burrows that Stacy again stole all of these things, right?
Right,
Monetary things that had monetary value, the cell phone, right?
right,
The debit card,
right,
the ring.
right,
And just to put this in perspective, in April of 2021, you were the one who lost your job at JBS, right?
right,
And so 6 months before this incident, you lost your source of income.
right,
Stacy wasn't helping you financially at all, right?
right.
And that was actually something that you were angry about with her,
Yes,
right? That she wasn't helping you with the bills.
right,
And you told Detective Burrows that you lost your job at JBS in April, and your mom was actually the one who was helping you pay your rent for your apartment.
right,
And then your grandma helped some, right?
right.
But then you got behind on your electricity bill.
Yes,
And then in August, you lost your apartment.
right,
And so come September, October, around this time, you're just essentially bouncing back and forth and kind of homeless, right?
right,
And then in September, you lost your car as well, right?
right,
Because you were behind in your payments
right,
and your car actually got repoed, right?
right,
And so in the few weeks and days leading up to this incident, you have no money, no place to live, right?
right. While I was staying at my grandma's.
And that was sort of a touchy relationship, right? Because of family dynamics,
Right,
right? And you weren't welcome there all the time, right?
right,
And you were behind on bills. And again, as we saw in these notes, there was times where Stacy would sleep in her car because you had nowhere else to go.
right.
She had a place to go, right?
Yeah,
She had family who was willing to have, she had her bedroom, right?
right,
She had her own car.
right.
She had the Tahoe, right?
Yes,
And in addition, she's in this like completely different place of her life than you, right?
right,
She's only 19.
right,
She's got no kids, right?
right.
You have children to take care of.
Yes,
And you are just not doing that, right?
right,
And then you told Mr. Burrows that you were pretty sure after Ms. Rodriguez bleached the items that she also set them on fire, right?
yeah,
Yeah. Because one night you remembered that Stacy was getting some wood, right?
yeah,
And you made sure to tell Detective Burrows that you were not participating, right?
right,
You were not participating in this fire, right?
right,
And you told Detective Burrows that you were either inside the trailer or you also had decided to leave and go to a gas station, right?
right,
And you talked about that a little bit on direct examination, right?
right,
And again, while you were at the gas station, you were getting some snacks, some Mountain Dew, right?
yes.
You had a vehicle.
I was using her Tahoe.
Yeah. She wasn't with you at that point either, right?
No,
And you told Detective Burrows that after you got your snacks, you just decided to go for a drive.
right,
And that you remember just going for a drive and, quote, trying to take as much time as you could.
right,
Stacy wasn't calling you up saying, where are you, right?
no,
And even though you had also told Detective Burrows, again, and told this jury, you weren't able to move a finger without her seeing it, right?
right,
Right. And you drove around because you just didn't want to be at the property when she was burning this stuff, right?
yeah,
But you didn't mind being in the kitchen when she was killing someone, right?
right,
Right. And again, there's more exaggeration that comes with this story too. You
Argumentative, Your Honor.
I'll sustain the objection.
you told Mr. Burrows that Stacy likes fire, right?
right,
Yeah. And you knew that because one time you were having a bonfire at her brother's house making s'mores, and she told you she liked fire.
Right.
And you felt it was really important that Mr. Burrows know that, right?
Yeah, I just put two and two together.
Yeah. Because someone likes to make s'mores, so they must like to burn.
She also told me that's how she burnt the other bodies that she killed. She burned them too, so.
Oh, okay. That was something you never told Mr. Burrows during your proffer on June 8th, 2022, right?
My lawyers know about it.
That wasn't my question. You never told Mr. Burrows on your proffer where you told him you'd tell him the truth, anything about Miss Rodriguez burning bodies and the other 3 to 4 other people she killed, right?
I guess not.
And you told him about the other 3 or 4 bodies, right?
Right.
But you just left that part out, right?
I guess so.
But you made sure to tell him that Stacy likes fire because of the s'mores, right?
Right. That was the first time she told me, yeah.
And just so we're clear, one of the items that you claim Miss Rodriguez burned was a diamond ring,
Right.
right? And it was white gold, right?
I just remember it being like a wedding ring.
Right. It was a metal, right?
Yes.
Are you aware that you can't burn any of those items?
No.
Right. And you also told Mr. Burrows and this jury you have no idea what she did with those ashes, right?
Right.
So you talked about with Mr. Burrows, the weapon used. And again, under the same light of telling Mr. Burrows about the fire and why you think Stacy burnt things, liking s'mores and that kind of thing, you also told Mr. Burrows that about an hour and a half into your prof interview that you first saw the metal object that was used as a weapon when you guys came back from giving Mr. Dickerson's friend a ride. Does that sound right?
Yes.
You never noticed it before.
Right.
And you called it a metal thing to Mr. Burrows, right? Sorry.
Yes.
And you told Mr. Burrows that the metal thing was on the table.
Right.
You showed it to Stacy.
Right.
And you pointed the sharp thing out to Stacy, and you couldn't tell if she responded to it at all,
Right.
right? Or reacted, I guess, is a better way of saying it. And then later on during your proffer, you add more to this. You specifically tell Mr. Burrows that, you had never seen that before, but in hindsight, while you were sitting at the jail, you got to thinking that this could have been Stacy's after all.
Right.
After you were sitting in jail for, again, 7 to 8 months, reviewing discovery, talking to your lawyers, you got to thinking that this metal thing could have actually been Stacy's, right?
Right.
And the explanation for your conclusion of that it could have been Stacy's, at least when you're talking to Mr. Burrows, is that she's sneaky. She's very sneaky, right?
Right.
Right. And then these sort of dramatic descriptions of Miss Rodriguez have even been added to recently, right? Let me ask you this. Leading up to your testimony today, on the 21st, you met with Mr. Pralia, Mr. Burrows, I'm assuming Mr. McCormick, and your lawyers, right?
Right.
To talk about your testimony,
Right.
right? And during that conversation, you just spontaneously added to them that now Miss Rodriguez also has gang ties too, right?
Right.
Yeah. And so her gang moniker is actually this baby Joker, right?
Right.
And which is relevant because you also gave them these letters, these jailhouse letters that you claim are from her that say baby Joker on them as well, right? Never during your 7.5-hour proffer interview with Mr. Burrows on June 8th, 2022, do you mention anything about Miss Rodriguez being called baby Joker, right?
Right.
You never mentioned anything to Mr. Burrows on June 8th, 2022 about Miss Rodriguez having gang ties, right?
Right.
And again, you went into this proffer interview specifically knowing that you had to tell every single detail, right?
Yeah.
And as we've just seen and heard, you did point out to Mr. Burrows a lot of different things, from Miss Rodriguez liking fire to her being sneaky, right?
Yeah.
Never once do you say, hey, detective, also, she's a gang member and she goes by Baby Joker, right?
I did tell him at the end that I was fearful for the aftermath after she finds out my video.
That wasn't my question. In a 7.5-hour proffer, ma'am, you never once mention it. You waited until your meeting with the DAs right before this trial, and you know they're trying to get in these letters that we're showing the jury, right?
Right.
And Stacy's name is nowhere on those letters, right?
Right.
And so you had to connect who Baby Joker was with Miss Rodriguez, right?
No.
I want to talk to you now, ma'am, about your testimony yesterday concerning the beer bottles. Okay. On direct examination, you told this jury under oath that Miss Rodriguez grabbed 3 beer bottles. Do you remember that?
Yes.
And during your proffer interview, again, you knew that Mr. Burrows wanted the truth.
Right.
You knew the importance of the information you were giving to him, and specifically as they would relate to bringing charges and prosecuting Ms. Rodriguez, right?
Right.
And you told Mr. Burrows on June 8th, 2022, that you recalled Stacy grabbing a beer bottle and that she went to smash it on Mr. Dickerson's head, and that you told her, no, don't. And that then Stacy looked at you and smashed it on his head, right?
Right.
You then told Mr. Burrows that Stacy grabbed a second beer bottle and did it again, right?
Mm-hmm.
I'm sorry, is that yes or no?
Yes.
You never mentioned to him about a third beer bottle being involved, right?
Right.
And then later, even during that same interview, that same 7-hour interview, the story changes again, right? You told Mr. Burrows later, just even about 2 hours later in that same interview, that you thought Mr. Dickerson actually went to grab the beer bottle first. Do you remember that?
No.
Do you remember telling Mr. Burrows at, and for the prosecution's reference, it's hour 3, minute 33, 1 second. Yeah, and so Mr. Burrows says, she kind of standing there, and then Chris, or sorry, let me take that back. You say she is standing there, and then Chris is on the couch. And then you go on to say, and I think maybe he's trying to get a bottle. I don't know. But then she grabbed the beer bottle and goes to him, and then she misses.
Right.
So again, you told Mr. Burrows, even though you told the story yesterday that Mr. Dickerson never tried to get a beer bottle, you told Mr. Burrows something completely different on June 8th, right? That you were actually thought maybe he had tried to grab the beer bottle.
Right.
And so later in that same proffer interview, you claim that Miss Rodriguez actually missed the first time and hit Mr. Dickerson the second time.
Right.
Again, at no point during that 7.5-hour proffer do you ever tell Mr. Burrows anything about Stacy grabbing three bottles and smashing Mr. Dickerson's face 3 times, like you did this jury yesterday, right?
Right.
In fact, this is completely new evidence in the almost 4 years that this case has been pending, right?
Right. Well, the first time she missed it, and I remember her grabbing 2 other ones and smashing it into his face.
Right. But you never, in the almost 4 years this case has been pending, ever told anyone about Stacy grabbing 3 beer bottles, right?
I guess not.
You know, I think this may be a good breaking point. All right. Hi again, Ms. Farrello.
Hey.
So when we left off, we were talking about how sort of the different versions of how many beer bottles between your proffer and yesterday's testimony. And I want to continue with that and talk about your testimony yesterday in terms of the progression of events leading up to Mr. Dickerson's death, okay? So yesterday with Mr. Paralia, you really, I think it's fair to say, boiled it down to Ms. Rodriguez pushing Mr. Dickerson off of her, right?
Right.
And then you told the jury that was the point that Mr. Dickerson yelled to get out of your house or get out of his house, right?
Yeah.
And then you told the jury that it was after Mr. Dickerson yelled at you to get out of your house or get out of his house, that was when Ms. Rodriguez grabbed the beer bottle, right?
She had pushed him again on the couch and was holding him down and then grabbed the beer bottle.
But what you told Mr. Burrows on October 8th, 2022, as part of your proffer process, was that Mr. Dickerson yelled at you and her to get out of his house after he was already smashed with a beer bottle.
I remember him yelling that.
Right. But again, we're talking about the progression of events, right?
Right.
Because yesterday you testified that it was just a simple push and he's saying, get out of my house, right?
Right.
But to Investigator Burrows on October 8th, 2022, you said he didn't yell at you to get out of his house until after he was already smashed in the head with a beer bottle. In fact, your exact quote to Mr. Burrows on October 8th, 2022 was, quote, and then she grabs another beer bottle and did it again. And then there was blood just on his head. And he was just glasses on the floor. And I do remember him screaming, like, get out of my house, right? With Investigator Burrows, you never told him on October 8th, 2022, as part of your proffer, that Mr. Dickerson was yelling at you and Ms. Rodriguez to get out of the house just after Ms. Rodriguez pushed him to the floor, right?
Right.
And then you told the jury that Ms. Rodriguez said that she moved Mr. Dickerson's body from the couch to the floor to make it look like self-defense,
Right.
right?
Yes.
Can you help us understand how moving a body from the couch to floor would make something more or less likely to be self-defense?
I have no idea. That's what she told me. And I believed her because she had told me she killed other people.
You would agree with me that if someone were to act in self-defense, whether it happened on the floor or the couch, it wouldn't really matter, right?
Right.
And I want to go back to, and I apologize, I forgot to ask you this question. When you were describing to Investigator Burrows being uncomfortable at Mr. Dickerson's house before leaving to go get his friend, the very beginning of you getting there, you described to Mr. Burrows that you took a picture of what would have been Stacy's hand, your leg, and then Mr. Dickerson's dog.
Right.
Right? And that you texted your sister Hannah that same night this picture saying, oh my gosh, I think we're at some random guy's house.
Yeah.
And you told Mr. Burrows that you kept your location on just in case.
Right.
And you told Mr. Burrows, I sent her the picture, and you described for him what I just described, and that she actually responded to you, right?
Right.
Recognizing that she saw the message that you sent her, right?
Right.
And essentially telling you, oh my gosh, be careful,
Yes.
right? And then later, again, we're talking 4 or 5 hours later in your proffer, Mr. Burrows is sort of questioning you about this picture, right?
Right.
And it was at that point that you tell him, oh, actually, by the way, I snuck into my sister's house, or when she wasn't looking, I snuck on her phone and deleted that, right?
I went to her work, yeah, and I deleted those messages.
So that, I don't know if she actually ever saw that, is what you told Investigator Burrows.
I mean, she did see it because we were texting back and forth, but, you know, she was drunk that night too because we were both drinking.
But that wasn't what you told Mr. Burrows, right? On October 8, 2022.
I told him I deleted it. Yeah.
You didn't tell him anything about your sister being drunk that night, right?
Well, we were both at a party and we were both drinking, and that's the reason why I was driving, because she was drinking in Johnstown.
That wasn't my question. You never told Investigator Burrow when he's questioning you about, ma'am, help me understand. You're saying you sent this picture, your sister responded, but then you said you deleted it, but yet and you don't think that she would have heard you.
I had told the detective that when Stacy found out, because it was a couple days, I totally forgot about it. And when the news report came out, one of the news ones on Facebook, and I was like, well, shoot, I texted my sister. I told Stacy about it, and she got mad. She just flipped out, and I made an excuse to go to my sister's job. And I was like, hey, can I see your phone? You know, I want to get on Stacy's Facebook, because she blocked me, and that's when I deleted it.
What you told Investigator Burrows was that you didn't think your sister Hannah has saw the message, right?
I don't recall saying that. Well, I was probably talking about that. I didn't think she remembered it, because I've never spoken about it to her, and I didn't ever confess deleting the messages until this past week, because I didn't talk about my case or anything, and so that's when I told my sister.
When Mr. Burrows is asking you about this picture on June 8th, 2022, he asked you specifically, did she read it or not? Right?
Right.
And your justification to him at that point was, well, yes, she read it that night, but she didn't have context. Right?
Right.
And you told Mr. Burrows, quote, she read it. And then you later say, quote, one second. I don't want to misquote you, okay? Do you telling Detective Burrows that you don't think she saw it? The message.
Well, she did see it if she texts back.
Right.
But I don't.
Right.
Right.
You told Mr. Burrows, quote, my sister doesn't even know about it
Right.
because I had deleted it off her phone.
Right.
And to this day, she doesn't know anything about it,
Right.
which is completely inconsistent with, as you pointed out, her responding back to you that same night, right? Right?
I guess so.
There was some testimony just a moment ago when I was showing you the exhibits of snapshots of conversations that you took on Facebook about, you weren't sure about exactly when you took those screenshots, right?
Yeah.
On November 6, 2021, you had a conversation with Stacy about making plans that night. Specifically, you were making plans with your sister. Do you remember that night?
No.
It's fair, right? It was a while ago.
Right.
Do you remember a time where Hannah wanted to go out and you got upset with Stacy because she wouldn't essentially commit to going out, right?
Stacy wouldn't commit to going
Right.
out?
I'm asking you pretty vague questions, and I apologize about that. Would it be helpful to refresh your recollection about a Facebook message on November 6, 2021 between you and Stacy about going out that evening?
Yes.
These are from the Facebook records. They are pages. It's the Facebook. Yeah. So it just starts right here. It's on 039. Starts at 10:48. And while Mr. Perlia is looking at that, I want to move on to a different topic, okay? And I'll come back to that, just for the sake of time. So, do you know someone who identifies as Mr. Isaiah Vigil?
Yes.
How do you know him?
We've been friends since we were kids, went to school together, and
After Mr. Dickerson's death, approximately a couple weeks later, was there a time where you, Mr. Vigil, and Ms. Rodriguez went to Roasties?
right, yeah.
And I think we actually saw a picture of the three of you took smiling at Roasties, right?
Yes.
And while at Roasties, or let me ask you this, Ms. Rodriguez wasn't friends with Mr. Vigil, right?
No.
And I'm saying Mr. Vigil because that's the pronouns that that person chooses, correct?
Yes.
As far as you're aware, right?
Yes.
Okay, I just want to make sure I'm being respectful of that. At Roasties, it was a little awkward. Is that fair to say?
Right.
Because originally it was supposed to be just you and Mr. Vigil going out,
Right.
nothing romantic between the two of you, right?
Right.
And Miss Rodriguez came.
Yes.
And there was some tension because Miss Rodriguez, again, was underage at the time.
Yeah.
And you and Mr. Vigil were actually going to go, I think you met at Cables, right?
I picked up Isaiah.
At Cables, right?
No, I picked him up at his friend's house.
Okay. Was there was plans to
I
go
think
to
we were gonna
bars.
go to like a karaoke night.
Right. There was plans to go to bars, but part of the frustration that evening was that Miss Rodriguez couldn't go into some of the places that you and Mr. Vigil could, right?
Right.
And while at Roasties, Miss Rodriguez wanted to leave, right?
I honestly don't really remember if she wanted to leave or not.
Okay. Do you recall her being on the phone and coming back from the bathroom and wanting to leave?
I don't recall that.
Okay. Do you recall Mr. Vigil essentially getting mad at Miss Rodriguez for telling him what to do?
Inside the bar? No.
Okay. And do you recall any sort of conflict between Mr. Vigil and Miss Rodriguez afterwards?
Afterwards, yes, I think there was just tension inside Roasties, and it was just off energy.
Okay. And after you left Roasties, the three of you went in the vehicle home, right?
Yeah.
I think you stopped at McDonald's on the way home,
Yes.
right? And then at some point, Mr. Vigil and Miss Rodriguez, the conflict becomes physical, right?
Right.
And after that evening, Mr. Vigil actually sent you either a text message or a Facebook message about it, right?
Yeah.
And do you recall Mr. Vigil sort of owning up to his part of the conflict?
Right.
Can I have one moment, please? Specifically, when Mr. Vigil takes accountability or tells you in this message afterwards about, owning his half of the conflict, he specifically tells you something along the lines of like, I deserved that ass beating, right?
Yeah.
You done with that?
Are you admitting it?
And so I just want to make sure before Mr. Perelia gets back up. Sorry, Vicky. When we're talking about that October 15 or the middle of October incident with Mr. Vigil, that had nothing to do with the incident with Mr. Dickerson, right?
No.
It had nothing to do with Mr. Vigil sensing that Ms. Rodriguez or knowing about Ms. Rodriguez being kind of threat to you, right?
He did kind of sense that.
Okay. Is it your testimony today that you've previously told Mr. Vigil about Ms. Rodriguez killing you?
No.
Because that would certainly not make sense when you look at that picture of the three of you smiling, right?
Yeah, I didn't tell him, but he sensed the abuse in the relationship between us.
He sensed it,
Yeah.
and yet you still take that smiling picture, right?
Yeah.
And yet he still went out that night with you, right?
Yes.
And at no point did you tell him, like, here's what's going on in my relationship. This person I'm with just killed someone and is a serial killer.
No, I never said that.
I'm afraid he's going to kill me. You never told Mr. Vigil that either, right?
No.
So I'm going to ask you to review what I've previously shown Mr. Perelia. And this is that Facebook conversation I was talking about on November 6th, okay, 2021. Can we approach?
Yes, go ahead. Go ahead.
Is your memory refreshed now, ma'am?
Yes.
And so, again, the point of this is we can only rely on the screenshots that you took, right?
Right.
And so when we're talking about whether or not Ms. Rodriguez didn't let you move a finger, we actually also have Facebook messages, at least this one, that seems to suggest you guys were going out in two different locations on November 6, 2021, right?
Right.
In fact, you're making plans about going with your sister, right?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
And Stacy's telling you, quote, have fun, right?
Right.
She's not telling you, don't you dare leave my side or else I'm going to kill you, right?
Right.
She's telling you to just essentially go out with your sister, go to Fuzzy's, go have a good time.
Right.
And actually, you were telling her, quote, you fucking piss me off,
Right.
right? And you fucking piss me off. And you're saying that in the context because she's like, I think I'm going to try to go do my own thing tonight.
Yeah. She was just mad.
She wasn't the one saying that. You were saying that.
Yeah, I said that.
You were saying that because she said, I need something to do, TN, which means tonight.
Right.
And you got fucking pissed, is your language, at her, right?
Right. I just think I just know how she is, and she would test me on things. And obviously my sister didn't like Stacy, and I was still trying to invite Stacy out. I didn't want her to feel left out because I knew how she would react.
That's why you say to Stacy, quote, on November 6, 2021, quote, all I want to do is be with you, and you act so fucking stupid.
Right. I was just
You're calling her
telling
fucking stupid, right?
Yeah.
She's not calling you fucking stupid.
Not right there. No.
And you even said in the next message, fuck you.
Right.
You sure didn't seem afraid that she's going to kill you then, right?
No.
I'm going to also show you it's been marked as defendant's exhibit QQA and QQB, and I've previously shown the prosecution.
QQ, okay,
QQA and then QQB.
okay.
Ma'am, do you recognize what those are?
Yeah.
And those are, again, more screenshots of that you took of particular Facebook conversations between you and Ms. Rodriguez, right?
Yes.
And you know that because, again, you took them, right?
Right.
And they're fair and accurate depictions of the screenshots that you took, right?
Right.
At this time, I'd move to admit QQA and QQB.
Any objection?
No.
All right, the court will admit those exhibits into evidence, and you may publish at your discretion.
Okay, so QQA and QQB, you have the actual metadata out front of you, right?
Yeah.
Can you tell the jury the date that both of these were created or modified?
Well, the created was 10:19 and the capture time was 10:05.
Can I approach her to point her to the correct area?
I'm sorry?
Approach to point her to the right area.
Yes.
Thank you. Sorry. So both of these say are 10/5, correct?
Let me see this one. Yeah.
And what's the year?
2021.
So this was a couple days after Mr. Dickerson's death, right?
Right.
And here you're telling Ms. Rodriguez, I'm so fucking pissed, I want to cry.
Right.
Right? I swear to God, if she's your little bitch and Stacy's telling you WTFF LMFAO, right?
Right.
And you again reiterate to her, I feel like fucking crying how fucking pissed I am, right?
Right.
And in the next one on QQB, again, you call whoever you're talking about, or let me take it back. You say, I'm literally not playing, and Stacy is saying WTF, right?
Right.
And you say, my face is red right now. Red spelled with 3 Ds.
Right.
And RN meaning right now.
Right.
And again, Stacy's laughing some more, right?
Right.
And you say, quote, she a fucking dumb ass little bitch, right?
Right.
And again, there's more of this you really being angry and Stacy just kind of laughing things off,
Right.
right? Okay, so we've talked about a lot today, right?
Yeah.
And I appreciate you answering and taking the time to go through all these questions. And I know Mr. Pirelli is going to get back and ask you some questions. But I just want to finish up today, at least this portion, with you and talking about your proffer agreement. Okay. As we heard, you were promised by these DAs that you could essentially come back and ask Judge V. Hill to reduce your 32-year sentence depending on how you testified today and yesterday.
Part of my deal?
Yes.
Yes.
And so you are aware, well aware, that whether or not you get less than 32 years depends on your testimony, right?
Right.
Because the specific agreement that we saw from the prosecution just says that the prosecutors won't object to the untimely 35B request.
Right.
And a 35B is a motion that your attorneys can file to ask Judge V. Hill to reduce your sentence.
Right.
And you know that normally the law says you only have 126 days to file that from the time you were sentenced.
Right.
And now it's over that, right?
Right.
And so basically the prosecution is saying, we will agree that that law doesn't matter and that after you're done testifying, you can ask Judge Vigil to reduce your sentence,
Right.
but only if it is a truthful and complete testimony, right?
Right.
And that, again, is their truth, right?
No.
Do you think, ma'am, that they're going to be okay with asking for a reduction of the sentence if you come in here and tell everyone that Ms. Rodriguez acted in self-defense?
I'm telling the truth.
That's not what I asked. I said, do you think that they would uphold their end of the agreement if you came in here and said that?
I mean, no, because then I would be lying.
And again, going back to where we first started the very conversation, your ability to get home to those little kids that we heard depends on what you say today, right?
Right.
And as a mother, you're going to say and do whatever you can to get home to your kids, right?
Not say I'm here to tell the truth, and I owe it to Christopher and his family.
Nothing further. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Any redirect examination? Go ahead, please.
You were asked a lot of things
Yeah.
about a lot of topics,
Yeah.
not many about your role in the murder.
Right.
Let's, I guess, start where she started and where she ends. You love your children,
Yeah.
okay? You were specifically asked to start cross-examination that, ma'am, you lied to your children,
Yeah.
right? How old are they again?
8, 7, and 5.
How old were they at the time of this? When you make that first call after being arrested to start talking through this?
My son was 5, and my daughter's 3, and my youngest was 2. She just turned 2 weeks when I got arrested.
Okay. Ma'am, are you going to tell a 5-year-old that mommy's girlfriend stabbed somebody in the neck 5 times
No.
and that you handed her the weapon?
No.
Are you going to tell your 3-year-old that mommy's girlfriend, after stabbing him 5 times in the neck, left, got gas, and burnt his whole body?
No.
Are you going to tell your 2-year-old that after you go back and you burn his body, that you flee and you make a promise not to talk about it?
No.
Did you tell your 5-year-old, your 3-year-old, your 2-year-old that she went through all his shit right after she stabbed him in the neck 5 times?
No, I did not.
Would that be age appropriate in your opinion as a mother of 3 small children?
No.
Let's talk about your kids then. Throughout this process, have you seen them?
No.
You haven't seen your children.
No.
Why not?
My kids' dad just, he hasn't came and brought them since I've gotten sentenced to prison.
Okay. So you've never told your kids what you did.
No.
You never told your kids what she did.
No.
Have you told this jury?
Yes.
Is that the truth?
Yes.
Ma'am, you were asked a lot about this desire to get out.
Right.
You have a desire to get out, right?
Yes.
You have a desire to be back in your children's life.
Yes.
Do you feel guilty about your role in this case?
Yes.
Section 4143.
Give me just a second. All right, I'll overrule the objection. The witness can answer.
You can answer, ma'am.
Yes.
Do you feel guilty?
Yes.
Why?
Because I should have handled things differently. And I hurt a lot of people.
Ma'am, I gotta ask, are you a mastermind?
No,
Did you come up with a plot
no,
that you would come up with this conspiracy against the defendant, your lover, and put things in your phone
no,
in all of this time period with the hopes that then somebody would be incredibly thorough, look through it all, and then use it against her?
And I'm sorry, before you answer, I'm sorry, Ms. Dever, I couldn't hear you. Could you repeat the objection?
Bolstering.
Bolstering? All right, I'll overrule the objection.
can I answer?
Yeah, you can answer.
No, I did not do that.
I mean, I'm not trying to demean you, but are you that smart?
No,
Can you see the future?
no,
You talked about having shame and that you're feeling those emotions afterwards.
right,
And there was discussions about that to Javi.
right,
Do you feel shame?
yes,
Did Chris deserve to die?
no,
In your opinion, is his death justified in any way?
Your Honor, objection.
I'll sustain the objection.
You feel shame for your role.
right,
Ma'am, you were asked and cut off, and you were able to respond part of the way and said, it's the right thing
to do.
to do.
Again, Your Honor, bolstering.
All right, I'll overrule the objection.
What's the right thing to do?
To speak the truth, and I feel like his family should know to have that closure, and I feel like Christopher deserves it because he shouldn't have died that night.
You don't believe he deserved to die?
No,
Did he force you into a position where you thought you had to kill him?
no,
Did he force the defendant into a situation where you believe she had to kill him?
no,
Did she have to use that blunt object in his neck?
no,
Did she have to do it 5 times?
no,
Did she have to burn his entire house down?
no,
Did she have to take his stuff?
no.
Your Honor,
Let's talk more about this self-defense aspect, okay? Could you have left when this altercation starts?
Yes,
Could you have gone out the front door?
yes,
Could you have driven away?
yes,
Could the defendant have left out the front door?
yes,
Could you have left out and could she have driven away?
yes,
Was that exactly what Chris was asking you two to do?
Your Honor, I'm going to object. There's no duty to retreat. We've already talked about this.
Can
in
the
process.
parties approach?
Based on your observations, was Chris about to kill either of you?
Objection asked and answered.
I'll allow the witness to answer.
no,
Did you have a feeling he was about to?
Again, asked and answered.
I'll allow the witness to answer.
no,
Ma'am, you were discussing with defense these kind of stock photos of a layout that looked like it was from a website or a realtor. Is that fair? Like where it was staged?
of his house.
Yeah, it was
Yes.
X, Y, and Z. Do you remember those?
Yes,
Are those up there?
They should be.
If I could approach.
Yes, go ahead.
Ma'am, I'm handing you back X, Y, and Z. I'm also going to approach with 231.
Oh, sorry, that's a different.
And I'm sorry, Mr. Fraley, you said 231?
Yep. Okay, ma'am, you were shown these to try and say where you were looking and why you were looking and what vantage point you would have and discussion of the couch.
Right.
You remember that?
Yes.
Okay. Do you remember at your proffer that you actually drew a description of this?
Yes.
And I'm handing you, it's been marked as 231. Is that what you actually drew?
Yes.
Is that fair and accurate?
Yes.
Your Honor, at this time, I move for permission to admit 231.
Any objection to 231?
No.
All right, the court will admit into evidence 231, and you may publish at your discretion.
If we could show 231. Ma'am, you have it in front of you, but is that to the best of your abilities how you had laid that out?
Yes.
Okay, and can you describe to the jury, just take us through that progression when that was drawn for you, what we're dealing with?
I believe at the time you were asking me to place where Stacy and Chris was when that argument happened and where I was standing. And
Okay.
then after she had pulled him off the couch, I believe you asked me to draw where his body was.
Okay, and you drew that, and you put the couch up there, and then kind of, I guess, the head of it by the couch? Is that fair?
Yeah.
The final
Yes,
resting
yeah.
spot? Now, ma'am, I'm going to show you something you've never actually seen. You see People's Exhibit 144?
Yes.
Have you seen that?
No.
Do you know who drew that?
No.
Objection, relevance.
Okay.
I'll allow the witness to answer.
I want you to compare your Exhibit 231 to 144 as to where Chris's body would have been.
It seems like the exact same thing.
I agree with you, okay? And again, that was something that wasn't in packets up to 65.
Right.
It wasn't, I'm sorry.
Was not. All right. Now, ma'am, you were cross-examined about this aspect of the meeting before the proffer,
Right.
right? And you heard a lot of questioning about, well, your lawyers are involved and there's all this stuff.
Right.
Did your lawyers or your investigators tell you specifically what to say?
No.
Okay. Did they coach you to tell you, hey, you got to tell Investigator Burroughs X, Y, and Z?
No.
Did they give you the elements of first-degree murder, arson, burglary, or tampering with a witness and say, you're going to have to hit all of these points?
No.
Okay. Did they simply arrange the meeting?
Yes.
And to be clear, at that time, is your team doing their own investigation for your case?
Yes.
And their duty is to you,
Yes.
just like their duty is to her.
Right.
You understand that, right?
Yes.
You understand why she crosses you like this, right?
Yes.
You were asked about this beer bottle progression, okay? And that apparently, for the first time yesterday, you had discussed 3 separate beer bottles. Do you remember that?
Yes.
And that was on cross-examination that just happened,
Right.
right? You recall in the progression saying something to the extent that she grabbed a beer bottle and goes to hit him, but then misses.
Right.
And I go, no, don't. Let's just leave it. And she looks at me and grabs another beer bottle, and that's when she hits him on the head, then grabs another one and hits him again.
Right.
Okay? And is that the way you recall it?
Yes.
Okay? And to be clear, Do you, let's step back for a moment. Do you have any doubt whatsoever in your mind that Miss Rodriguez used a beer bottle and smashed it on Christopher's head? Do you have any doubt about that?
No.
Okay. I mean, you were there,
Right.
and you saw that portion, right?
Yes.
And I want to talk about this massive motive that you're apparently going to have.
You're not going to object to leading, and it's improper for the prosecutor to be testifying for this witness, basically.
I will sustain as to the phrasing of the beginning of that question. I didn't have the rest of it, so I don't know if it's leading or not, but Mr. Pralia, just mind that issue.
You saw this, right?
Right.
And you've been cross-examined for hours
Right.
about this motive of you making all this up
Right.
to get out to see your kids,
Right.
right?
Right.
And that you'll do anything for this sweetheart deal of 32 years.
Objection. It's mischaracteristics of the evidence. Her deal was not 32, it was 16 to 32.
I'll overrule the objection.
Right? You heard all that.
Right.
You endured that cross.
Right.
So explain to this jury, when you said you saw the smashing of this beer bottle, wouldn't it make more sense for you to say that you were right next to her and you see her stabbing that file into his neck time and time and time again, and nothing was obstructing your view?
Right.
I mean, if you're so out to get this woman, your sight is perfect, correct?
Yes.
Your hearing is perfect?
I'm sorry, Ms. Deborah,
Leading.
I'll sustain the objection.
Would your sight be perfect?
It would.
Would your hearing be perfect?
Yes.
You would have been stone cold sober, right?
Right.
You were asked about the things that were taken.
Yeah.
Specifically, you were asked about the phone.
Yes.
Did you look at that phone?
I did.
Okay. And can you describe to the jury, to the extent that you recall, what was on that phone of Christopher?
When Stacy asked me to open the phone, I started going through his pictures, and I remember seeing pictures of his dog and I believe his girlfriend, and I started feeling bad, and I started telling Stacy.
401, 403, and hearsay.
Oh, she has direct observation.
Give me just a second here. All right, I will overrule the objection. The witness can continue.
You can answer.
And I remember seeing pictures, and which I believe was his girlfriend, and I started feeling bad. I remember Stacy was like, "Get off the phone now and stop looking at the pictures." And I started feeling just bad.
Okay. You had guilt.
Yes.
You recall telling Detective Burroughs also that you saw photos of his mom, or what you thought was his mom.
Yeah.
In terms of these aspects of your motive, you were asked specifically that you kept all this hidden, right?
Right.
After the fact.
Right.
And that the obvious answer would be that you're scared.
Right.
And in the first part of your testimony, when I last got to ask questions, fair to say you couldn't give that full answer?
Yes.
You couldn't explain what truly you were afraid of?
Yes.
Objection.
What's the objection?
Your approach.
Sure.
Now you can answer, right?
Yeah.
Are you scared of the defendant?
Yes.
Does your relationship contain abuse?
Yes.
And did you still love her?
Yeah.
Do you still have feelings for her?
Right now, no.
Did you during that time period?
Yes.
And looking at all the people around you, were you two alone essentially on an island after this event on October 3rd?
No.
Did you have others that you felt like you could tell about this particular case?
No, I felt alone and I felt like I couldn't talk to anybody. And I was just terrified of her. And I was believing all the lies that she had told me. And I was just terrified of, what was gonna happen
If what?
if I did tell the cops. And I just remember at that, Stacy had already told me that she was gonna kill me. She just didn't have the details set out yet before the murder happened. And I just remember thinking I can't show no fear, even though I was terrified of her. And the abuse got worse after. At this point in my life, I just didn't care about me anymore. I was just careless. I didn't care if I died. And I feel like she knew that. And so she threatened one night. She put a knife to my neck and she cut off all my clothes. And she told me if I ever talked to my kid's dad, she was gonna kill him. And I believed her. I feel like at this point, she just knew she couldn't get to me anymore. And so she was using the things that I truly loved. And, the abuse just got worse and it just kept trying to stay strong and just not show any fear. I was doing everything she wanted. I was just bypassing the time because I truly believed she was going to kill me.
You had stated multiple times, ma'am, that after hearing the sound of him being stabbed, that you had made the decision that you couldn't show fear.
Right.
Internally, were you living in fear?
Yeah. I was terrified of her. And I just try not to show it. I didn't want her to know that I was because I felt like that was just the best survival mode to go through. And if I feel like she lied about a lot of things that I believed, like her being in this gang and killing other people. And now that I think about it, I feel like, she was just
Objection,
telling me
narrative.
these.
I'm sorry?
Narrative.
All right, I'll overrule the objection.
You can continue, ma'am.
And I feel like she was just telling me these things just so I could be scared. And I believed it.
Okay. And so, for example, you had talked about this aspect of her saying that she'd killed before.
Right.
And did you actually believe that at the time?
Yes. She told me that, she pulled the body down so it can make it look like self-defense. She's told me that she's burnt the other bodies and it takes longer for them to identify it. And, me personally, I didn't know that stuff about killing. And it made sense because somebody who killed other people and knew this stuff, so I believed her.
Okay. And so as part of that, ma'am, you're saying you believed what she said without proof of it, fair?
Right.
as to those other things. As to Christopher, did you have proof that she had killed someone?
No. Oh, with Christopher, yes. Yes.
With Christopher?
Yes.
On October 3rd?
Yes.
I mean, I want to make this very clear. Who all was there on October 3rd?
Me, Stacy, and Christopher.
Okay. And did you actually see Christopher, as you drew it,
Yes.
bleeding out?
Yes.
I mean, there's no other person for that one, right?
Objection, leading.
All right, I'll sustain the objection.
Was anybody else there?
No.
And at that point, did you guys understand when you weren't arrested on October 4th, October 5th, October 6th, all those days, that the police didn't know who'd done it?
Yes.
I mean, did that make sense?
Yes.
So you were asked a lot of things that you chose not to do, like you didn't drive away,
Yes.
that you didn't call 911,
Yes.
that you didn't call Javi,
Yes.
you didn't call Hannah,
Yes.
you didn't go to GPD.
Yes.
Did the defendant ask you whether or not you guys should call 911?
No.
Did she ever suggest we should go to GPD?
No.
At that point, was there ever a suggestion, other than what the defendant said, to make it look like self-defense? Or was it simply to keep your mouth shut?
I think it was to keep my mouth shut.
Ma'am, you were asked about your motive and the fact you didn't take accountability, right?
Right.
Did you hand the murder weapon to the defendant?
I did.
Did she ask for that murder weapon?
Yes.
Did you hear it get used?
Yes.
Ma'am, when you testified yesterday and when you're here today, are you able to relive that event? Are you able to look and remember what happened to Chris?
Objection, Your Honor, this is for 1403 and bolstering.
I'll overrule the objection.
Yeah. That's just something that should have never happened. I just feel so... And I don't think she realizes that it affected a lot of people. And
Objection, Your Honor, 4143.
I'm going to sustain that answer, sustain that objection as the answer was non-responsive. The question was, are you able to look and remember what happened to Chris? Ms. Varela, if you can answer that question specifically.
yes,
Vividly?
yes.
You were asked about the arson. And specifically, I guess to back up before that, you were asked about going through the pockets.
Yes,
And your testimony was that you believe that the defendant took something out of the victim's pocket.
yes,
And you believe that was a wallet.
yes,
And now you were shown a wallet that was in his car.
yes.
Are you,
Objection, that's not in evidence.
All right, I'll overrule the objection.
are you still confident that something was taken out of his pocket?
Yes,
Are you still confident that his phone was taken?
yes,
You were asked about this lack of discussion on the way around after you had left, and that there was no explicit, hey, I'm going to go light the house on fire.
Right.
Okay? You were given directions.
Yes.
You were told what to do.
Yes.
And ultimately, did you go back to that place?
Yes.
You knew Christopher was dead at that point, right?
Yes.
Did you ever get out of that car?
No.
You were then asked about the destruction of these items at a later time, right?
Yeah.
And specifically that you didn't participate in it.
Right.
Do you believe those items were burnt?
Yes.
Why do you believe that?
I had seen the bonfire when I had came back, and it smelled like chemicals.
And specifically, you had stated that you didn't want to be part of that and you left.
Right.
And you told that to,
Objection leading.
well, did you tell that to Detective Burrows?
And I'm sorry, Mr. Praley, let me respond when I have an objection. Okay, give me a second.
I'll rephrase if the court wants.
If you want to rephrase, go ahead.
Did you tell that to Detective Burrows?
Yes.
And specifically when you got back, how was she acting towards you?
She was upset and just angry. I remember going back into the trailer, and she came in and slammed the door and walked back out, and she was just mad. And I knew it was because I wasn't participating.
Okay. Ma'am, there was discussion about you texting another man in the days or weeks after the homicide,
Yes.
right? What was his name?
I think his Facebook name was Mobster, he went by.
Mob Trujillo?
Yeah.
And ultimately, was he writing you?
Was he texting me?
Right.
Yes. We
And-
had texted like throughout, even earlier in the months, kind of like throughout mine and Stacy's relationship,
Okay.
like that summer.
Okay. And ultimately, it was discussed that you had sent him nude photos
Yes.
and that Miss Rodriguez found out about it,
Right.
right? What was her reaction when she found out about it?
She was just angry. She showed me a picture on her phone that she took of my phone, and it was like, I thought you didn't like guys like this, and just going off on it. She blocked him off my phone, and then later she ended up showing me that she messaged whoever he was talking to, and I didn't really get to, she just showed me on her phone, and I think she was trying to ruin their relationship or something.
Ma'am, you were asked about an incident with, is it Isaiah?
Yes.
And you had known him since high school.
Right.
Okay. Describe the relationship again between Isaiah and Stacy. Was there one?
No.
Okay. How are you guys all friends?
Well, Isaiah was my friend, and so I don't know how they initially met. Maybe when we were out and he was there, but
You can continue.
that's kind of, they never had a relationship. It was through me.
Okay. And ultimately on that October 16th, you guys had gone out to Roasties.
Right.
There was that discussion, right?
Right.
If I could have a moment.
Sure.
Okay, ma'am. We're going to show what's marked and admitted as People's Exhibit 136. Who are we looking at here, ma'am?
Isaiah, me, and Stacy.
Okay. And what was Isaiah's previous name?
Kayleen.
Okay. Can you describe then that night as it pertains to what you recall?
I remember picking up Isaiah, and I think we were gonna go out to a karaoke night, and it was just supposed to be me and him. And Stacy was texting me, and I think I had to tell Isaiah, like, is it okay if we go pick up Stacy? And so we went and picked up Stacy, and she was driving in the Malibu. And I remember going to Roasties, and things were just, there was just tension. I don't know, I feel like Stacy was just already mad. And I do remember that night, Isaiah telling me, like, oh, it's gonna be one of those
Objection,
nights.
Hearsay.
Give me just a moment. All right, I'll overrule the objection. The witness can continue.
And I remember him saying, oh, it's gonna be one of those nights. And I think he was just catching her vibe. And Roasties, it was okay. I mean, it was just, I was just trying to be mutual with both of them. And I remember leaving, and Stacy started driving, and she was pretty drunk because she hit the median. And I told her, get out, let me drive. And so I was driving, and we stopped at McDonald's, and then I went to go drop off Isaiah. And I remember they started arguing, and I don't really remember what it was about. And I remember Stacy pulling Isaiah out of the car, and that's when I got out, and because I was in the driver's seat, and I went around, and Stacy was on top of Isaiah, and she was using her weight on him. And I remember her hitting his head, and her looking at me, and she told me to go back to the car. And so I went back to the car, and then she got in the car, and we just drove off.
So I want to break down this assault a little bit. Who threw the first punch to the best of your recollection?
I don't know who threw the first punch.
If I could approach?
Sure.
Mickey, what is that? Of what? Of what? Can I see it, like your time seems? Sure. That's what I thought. Okay, thank you.
Ma'am, do you recall speaking about this at the proffer with Detective Burrows?
Yes.
And I understand that prior to now, we weren't able to speak about it, right?
Right.
Who do you believe threw the first punch according to your interview back then?
Stacy.
And then you had talked about that she was on top of her with her whole weight.
Right.
Can you describe that again for the jury?
I remember her just on top, and Isaiah was on her stomach, and Stacy was just sitting on her.
Okay. Now, ma'am, in terms of prior incidents with you, you had discussed that the defendant used her weight.
Right. She would always, that was one of her things that she would do. She would put her weight on you.
Is that similar or different to what happened to Chris when she had asked for you to go retrieve the weapon?
Similar.
And again, that would have been after he had been hit with the beer bottles.
Right.
Your Honor, I'm going to ask to take the exhibit down.
I'm sorry.
The exhibit's still up. Can we
Oh,
take it
are
down?
you done with this, Mr. Brilla? Or are you still referring to it?
Sure, that's fine. We can take it down. Your Honor, I think this is probably a logical stopping point before we get into some of the other admitted exhibits.
Sure. All right. Ladies and gentlemen, we'll go ahead and recess for the day.